Chapter 1132. Just as the Canberra army was in chaos, the 100,000 great Xia Imperial Guards were like a sharp knife that pierced into the abdomen of the enemy. Before the dark of the night, at the most unlikely time, a huge battle suddenly broke out. The attack of the Imperial Guards exacerbated the chaos in the Canberra army. They were like a group of frightened wild deer on the grassland, desperately running forward and trampling on each other under the pursuit of a lion. As long as they could outrun their companions, they would be able to win a chance of survival. In the process, there were also players who realized that something was wrong and stopped to prepare to fight back against the enemy. However, they were in the minority. In front of the great Xia Imperial Guards who were charging at high speed, these warriors were like quicksand that were quickly killed, leaving only streaks of white light. For the Canberra army, it was impossible to organize a large-scale counterattack. The only thing they could hope for was to get away from the great Xia Imperial Guards as much as possible and drag time into the night. The hour before nightfall was particularly difficult to bear. When the night quickly covered the sky from the distant skyline, the already exhausted Canberra army heaved a long sigh of relief as if they had seen their savior. The nightmare was finally over for the time being. After nightfall, the great Xia Imperial Guards indeed did not pursue and instead returned to the camp to rest. On this day, they had already achieved fruitful results. First, they defeated the enemy's 100,000 vanguards and dispersed the enemy's main force. A conservative estimate was that in just 1 hour, more than 50,000 people had died in battle, and there were as many as 100,000 who surrendered. Those who surrendered were all the Imperial Guards of the royal city. After this battle, more than half of the Canberra Imperial Guards had been paralyzed. It was late at night. The 250,000 Canberra soldiers finally woke up and stopped retreating. Some of them collapsed to the ground. They looked around in a daze. Everywhere they looked, they saw the same confused faces. The night wind blew, bringing with it waves of coldness. Most of them sat on the ground, took out their cold rations, and chewed them stiffly. There were also people who silently carried utensils and looked for water sources around to bring drinking water for their companions to soothe their smoky throats. The entire army was lifeless. The two inexplicable defeats had greatly weakened the strength of the army, and their morale was low. The invincible image of the great Xia Imperial Guards had been deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. Under such circumstances, even if they survived the night, what could they do? We can't win. I'm afraid our country is going to perish, someone said as tears of bitterness flowed from his eyes. No one laughed at him, because everyone's feelings were roughly the same. Physical exhaustion was nothing compared to spiritual despair. In a night breeze, someone sang a folk song. It was Australia's most famous folk song, Jungle Wanderer. There was once a tramp. I camped by the pond. They pitched their tent under a eucalyptus tree. While looking at the bonfire, while singing, "Waltz, please wander with me." The song described a wandering wanderer who made a cup of tea in the jungle. When he caught a sheep to eat, the original owner of the sheep brought 3 police officers to arrest him. The wanderer fled when he heard the news. In the end, he had nowhere to hide, so he jumped into the lake and ended his life. The mood of the vagabonds seemed to be very suitable for the current situation, and more people began to hum. A thirsty sheep walking into the small pond, the tramp seized it excitedly. He quickly stuffed it into his pocket, feeling very pleased with himself. "I want you to wander with me." The tramp jumped into the middle of the water with a splash. "You'll never catch me." Every time we passed by the pond, we seemed to hear his free soul flying in the sky. At the last line of the song, some people were already in tears. Weren't they a group of vagabonds who were chased by the enemy to the point of despair? The final outcome might be to take the initiative to jump into the lake. The whistling night wind took away the sobs, leaving only the coldness on the ground. Unstoppable drowsiness struck, and the exhausted soldiers fell asleep on the ground. They clustered around each other and prepared to spend a sleepless night in the night wind. "Let's fight to the death tomorrow, regardless of victory or defeat." The soldiers made up their minds. The wish of the Canberra army to fight to the death was not realized in the end. Early in the morning, the sky was just beginning to brighten. The Canberra army, who had been suffering from the cold all night, had already woken up. They stretched their limbs on the wet grass and moved their somewhat stiff bodies. Stoves were set up, boiling hot milk and oatmeal bread. The soldiers took out all their dry rations and prepared to have a full meal before fighting to the death with the enemy. Right at this moment, the sounds of battle suddenly rang out from all directions. The surrounding sentry posts were being wiped out one by one at a speed visible to the naked eye. They used the last bit of their lives to send a final warning to their companions. Just in time, the soldiers thought that it was the Great Xia Imperial Guard from yesterday, so they did not panic at all. They were prepared to fight to the death with the enemy. Since they were here, they might as well fight. They were wrong. Not only were the 100,000 Great Xia Imperial Guards participating in the encirclement, but also the Tiger Leopard Cavalry led by Ma Chao. It turned out that not long after the encirclement at noon yesterday, Lu Bu led the Dragonblood Cavalry to escort the prisoners of war, while Ma Chao led his troops away from the main force and rushed to Canberra. Halfway there, he received news that the Canberra army had left the city. Logically, what Ma Chao and his troops should have done at that time was to take down Canberra. That way, the battle in Australia would be completely over without any suspense. However, before the attack on Australia, the military advisor Jia Su had strictly instructed, in this attack on Australia, the priority is to destroy the enemy, followed by attacking the city. Even if we surround the city, or even lead our troops to attack the city, we cannot rashly destroy the stone tablet and occupy the city. When to occupy the city and end the war, we have to ask the Supreme Command. Hua Tsubing knew a thing or two about the Supreme Command's plan, so he naturally conveyed the order to the 5 commanders of the Imperial Guards. Although Hua Tsubing was usually smiling, Ma Chao did not dare to disobey the commander's military orders. During the battle to exterminate the Jin army, when Lu Bu led his troops to the predetermined assembly point, they were late by an hour because the bridge was destroyed by the heavy rain. At that time, Hua Tsubing's face turned cold. Poor Lu Bu, not only did he suffer 20 whips, but he also braved the cold wind and stood outside the commander's tent for the entire night. After this incident, the commanders did not dare to disobey their commander's orders at all, not to mention disobeying the orders and acting on their own. Therefore, Ma Chao had no choice but to give up the military exploits that he had already obtained. He directly bypassed Canberra and chased after the enemy's advancing route. That was why 2 groups of Imperial Guards surrounded the Canberra army in the morning. Chapter 1133. Faced with the encirclement of the Great Xia Imperial Guards, the fate of the Canberra army could be imagined. Just as the battle in Australia was raging, the battlefield in Luzon, thousands of miles away, finally broke the silence, and there were new movements. It was the reinforcements from Java that broke the balance of the battlefield. As the only Lord of Java, UIS was naturally not a pushover. After deciding to give up the Australian region, he had already turned his attention to the Luzon battlefield. The Trinity was missing a corner, and Luzon could not be lost. According to Luzon Lord Martin's suggestion, they were prepared to take the opportunity when the Imperial Guards of Great Xia were trapped in the Australian region to take the initiative to attack. The target of the attack was the Great Xia Inland Army operating on MLL Island in the south. The Hanoi Army had only sent 3 legions to participate in the battle, with a total of 210,000 soldiers. Iluo City, the main city of Luzon, was garrisoned with 100,000 territorial troops and 100,000 Javanese reinforcements. Before the war, Iluo City had a total of 400,000 territorial troops. 100,000 people died in the Battle of Lavik, and the remaining 300,000 troops were deployed on the 3 main islands. 100,000 soldiers were stationed on Luzon Island to coordinate with the Royal Guards and combat players to stop the Great Xia Longxiang Army from advancing south. 100,000 soldiers were stationed on MLL Island to prevent the Great Xia Army from invading. Ma Ting's plan was to take advantage of the fact that the Great Xia's Dragon Stallion Army and Imperial Guard were being obstructed to gather their superior forces and encircle the Great Xia's River Army. If they could wipe out these 3 legions in one fell swoop, it would undoubtedly be very exciting. UIS was convinced by Martin and decided to add another 150,000 reinforcements on top of the 100,000 reinforcements to form a 450,000-strong coalition army to head south to MLL Island and encircle Hanoi's army. This time, the situation of the Hanoi army immediately became difficult. As a border defense force, Hanoi's army might have a slight advantage in terms of weapons and equipment compared to the territorial armies of Java and Luzon, but their overall strength was not as overwhelming as the Imperial Guards. 2 against 1, the Hanoi army would definitely not be able to win. November 11th, MLL Island, Iligan City. As the only territory of Luzon, Iluo City not only had a teleportation array in the main city, but there was also a teleportation array in Iligan City on MLL Island. At that time, they were still guarding against Java, which had now become their ally. In the evening, 100,000 troops of Iluo City, together with 250,000 Javanese reinforcements, teleported to this place and joined the 100,000 troops of Iluo City stationed in the city. During the war in Australia, the Hanoi army successfully landed in the bay south of MLL Island with the help of the Cliff Mountain Fleet. They captured the base city of Dao City and used it as a stronghold. Shui Rengui, the commander of the Hanoi army, was well aware of this point. If they really wanted to take down MLL Island, they must first break through Iligan City and cut off Iluo City's support to MLL Island. Therefore, after conquering Dao City, the Hanoi army didn't sweep around, but headed north to Iligan City as fast as they could. Before Luzon's reinforcements arrived, the Hanoi army had already besieged Iligan City. Facing the siege of Hanoi's army, the 100,000 territorial troops stationed in the city were originally trembling with fear, worried that they would not be able to defend. The sudden teleportation of the 350,000-strong army changed the course of the war. That night, Hanoi army camp. The lights in the tent flickered. Shui Rengui, dressed in military attire, sat upright in front of a desk. In his hand was a secret order that had just been sent by the High Command. He seemed to be deep in thought. The Black Snake Guard's infiltration of Luzon was very successful. The moment Java's reinforcements arrived in Iligan City and disappeared with the Luzon territorial troops, they were captured by the Black Snake Guards in the city and reported to the High Command immediately. The enemy's obvious battle intent naturally did not escape Bai Qi and Jia Su's discerning eyes. What does the military advisor think we should do to deal with the enemy's change of tactics? Should we inform the Hanoi army to retreat in advance? Bai Qi asked for Jia Su's opinion. Jia Su was still as calm as ever. He did not directly answer Bai Qi's question, but instead said, according to the battle report from the front lines, the Battle of Australia is almost over. It can end at any time. Bai Qi was also very patient. He sat upright and did not move, quietly listening to Jia Su reveal the answer to the riddle. I have a plan that can realize the cooperation of the 3 territories. Please review it, General. Jia Su began to explain his battle plan in detail. The more Bai Qi listened, the brighter his eyes became. When Jia Su finished, Bai Qi was already full of admiration. He revealed a rare smile and said, "The military advisor is indeed worthy of being the dynasty's #1 strategist. You are indeed a work of the gods." "General, you flatter me," Jia Su said humbly. Bai Qi made the decision. "Let's follow the military advisor's plan. I will send secret orders to the various departments." The order that Shui Rengui received was very strange. The Supreme Command wanted the Hanoi army to pretend to be defeated all the way until they retreated to Davao City without the enemy noticing any flaws. In the process, the Hanoi army had to create a false impression that they could completely annihilate the Hanoi army with just a little bit more effort. This would keep them in suspense and lure the enemy's main force out of Iligan City. Could it be that the Supreme Command wants to? Shui Rengui could vaguely guess the Supreme Command's intention. But where will the troops come from? Since he could not figure it out, Shui Rengui stopped thinking about it and focused his energy on the military order. It was not easy to fulfill the Supreme Command's request. Man, here, summon all the generals. We'll discuss it through the night. Yes, sir. Very soon, all the generals of Hanoi's army and above gathered in the big tent. Sitting in the front row were naturally the three army commanders, Pei Xingjian, Li Li, and Xiang Zhuang. The news that the enemy had sent reinforcements to Iligan City had already spread throughout the army. The generals did not know what to do next, whether to attack or defend. They naturally rushed over when they heard that the commander wanted to discuss it in the tent. Shui Rengui did not waste any time and quickly made arrangements. The generals only dispersed late into the night and passed on the battle tactics to the division level. November 12th, Iligan City. Early in the morning, when Luzon's Lord Martin led the generals up the city tower, the Hanoi army that had surrounded Iligan City had already retreated 10 miles overnight and could no longer be seen. They sure are well informed, Martin said with some disappointment. Martin had originally planned to give the Hanoi army a huge surprise when they attacked the city again. It seemed that the enemy's intelligence work was very well done. Since we've been exposed, let's fight outside the city. The war was a race against time. With every day that passed, there would be more variables in the war. Martin could not afford to hesitate at all. Once the military order was issued, the remaining 400,000 soldiers, who were left behind to guard the city, moved out in full force. As the Lord, Martin also stayed behind to hold the fort in Iligan City. Martin was not a fool. He naturally knew the importance of Iligan City. The consequences of losing the city was not something that he, nor the entire Luzon, could bear. Therefore, he would not let down his guard against Iligan City no matter what. Chapter 1134. The 400,000 soldiers of Luzon were like Mount Tai as they aggressively charged toward the temporary camp of the Hanoi army. Smoke and dust billowed along the way, setting off the prelude to the decisive battle on MLL Island. To some extent, the outcome of this battle would determine the direction of the entire Luzon war. At around 10 in the morning, the vanguard of the Luzon coalition army arrived at the camp of the Hanoi army. As far as the eye could see, the entire camp of the Hanoi army spanned a few miles along the undulating hillside. When the coalition general saw this, his eyes narrowed. The position in front of him was a typical place that was easy to defend and difficult to attack. To break through such a line of defense was more difficult than besieging the camp. However, since they were already here, there was no reason to hesitate. Furthermore, they had the advantage in military strength, so there was no reason to hesitate. After slightly reorganizing the somewhat messy formation, the coalition army rushed toward the high ground. Kill! For a moment, the sound of killing shook the sky. The two armies used the temporary camp as a medium to launch a fierce battle. As the Great Xia army, the Hanoi army naturally lacked courage and unyielding spirit. Even when facing an enemy twice their size, they were still fearless. The Luzon coalition army was also in high spirits. The earth-shattering battle started at around 10 in the morning and lasted until the evening before coming to an end. At the end of the battle, the green hillside had been trampled into bare mud by the coalition army. Tens of thousands of corpses fell on the hillside, and blood flowed everywhere, forming pools of blood at the foot of the hill. The Great Xia army is indeed as tough as the rumors say. Although the coalition general was praising the enemy, there was no trace of discouragement or fear in his words. Obviously, he was very satisfied with the performance of the coalition army in today's battle. In the beginning, the Hanoi army took advantage of the hillside to firmly hold the line, causing the coalition army to suffer a great loss and suffer heavy casualties. However, when the coalition army stabilized their position, their military strength advantage was displayed. In the afternoon, both sides were tied. It could even be said that near evening, the coalition army had already gained the upper hand. They were so close to completely tearing the enemy's line of defense and occupying the hilltop. Tomorrow, we will definitely take the position tomorrow. The coalition general was full of confidence. Unfortunately, the Hanoi army didn't give him this opportunity. After the two sides stopped fighting, The coalition army retreated 5 miles, set up camp, and prepared to rest for the night before launching the general attack the next day. The Hanoi army quietly packed their luggage overnight and quietly withdrew from the camp before dawn the next day. By the time the coalition army majestically killed their way up the hill at 8 in the morning, the camp was already empty. Damn it! The defending general of the Allied forces was furious and immediately ordered the pursuit. Just like that, one chased and the other fled. They walked and stopped, killing all the way south. Under Schwerengue's command, the Hanoi army had completed the task assigned by the Supreme Commander and led the Allied forces away from Iligan City. For this, the Hanoi army also paid a heavy price. In order to convince the Allied forces that the victory they hoped for was close at hand, the Hanoi army fought fiercely on many occasions, disregarding the sacrifices. Just as the two armies were in a stalemate, a group of soldiers was quietly making their move. On the 13th of November, a battalion of the 1st Formation of the Cliff Mountain Fleet, carrying 3,000 Divine Guards, quietly landed on the coast not far from Iligan City. Then, with the help of the Black Snake Guards, they snuck toward Iligan City. When it was close to dusk, the Divine Martial Guards successfully sneaked into the forest outside the city and quietly waited for night to fall. When the night covered the earth, the 3,000 Divine Guards moved swiftly towards the northern city wall like ghosts. There were only a few patrolling troops on top of the city wall, and they were sparsely lit with torches. Under the cover of their black cloaks, the Divine Martial Guards blended into the darkness and were undetectable to the naked eye. Go! Arriving at the foot of the city wall, Su Chu chose a blind spot and gave the order to attack. 5 Divine Martial Guards stepped forward and threw out the hooks in their hands. With a snap, they accurately hooked onto the battlement of the city wall. Then, like spiders, the 5 of them climbed up the city wall as if they were walking on flat ground. Then came the second wave, the third wave. The Divine Martial Guards who climbed up the city wall first used the dim light to sneak behind the guards nearby. The daggers in their hands flashed like cold light, killing the moment they saw blood. After killing them, they dragged the corpses to a dark corner and exchanged their equipment. The entire process was as smooth as water, as if they had rehearsed it beforehand. As the guards were killed one by one, the Divine Martial Guards at the foot of the city wall received the signal from their comrades and sped up the wall. In less than half an hour, the 3,000 Divine Martial Guards had gathered at the top of the city wall. The entire section of the city wall had been cleared. This was the terrifying part of the Divine Martial Guards. After years of training, this Divine Martial Guard could truly be considered a special force, capable of starting special operations behind enemy lines. The Forbidden Army was still far from this standard. After gathering, the Divine Martial Guards didn't stay at the top of the city wall for long. They walked down the city wall, and under the cover of the night and the guidance of the Black Snake Guards, they snuck into the city Lord's mansion. On the way, they also encountered patrolling troops. If they could hide, they would. If they couldn't, they would just kill their way over. The Luzon army wasn't stupid. Half an hour after the Divine Martial Guards entered the city, the patrolling troops discovered the corpses of the guards and immediately sounded the alarm. The silent Iligan City suddenly became noisy. The city lord's mansion. The Lord of Luzon, Martin, was still awake. The news from the front lines said that the Allied army was about to defeat the Hanoi army. Martin was so excited that he didn't feel like sleeping. At this moment, a soldier came to report that something was wrong at the top of the city wall. Oh, did a rat enter the city? Martin wasn't nervous with 50,000 soldiers guarding the city. But the news that came later made Martin realize the severity of the problem. Almost every 10 minutes, a patrol troop would be attacked. What was more terrifying was that every patrol troop that was attacked was completely wiped out, and not a single enemy corpse was left at the scene. This showed that the two sides weren't on the same level at all. All the signs showed that this was not a group of simple rats. If they weren't careful, they could turn into wolves. Quick, order the troops to gather at the city lord's mansion. Martin didn't know what the enemy's intentions were, but he still chose the safest strategy. After the order was given, other than the guards at the top of the city, the scattered troops began to gather at the city lord's mansion. The closer they were to the city lord's mansion, the more concentrated the troops were. Under these circumstances, no matter how strong the divine martial guards were, they couldn't avoid being exposed to the enemy. There were only a few paths to the city lord's mansion, and there were troops on each path. There was no way to hide. Kill. Since they couldn't hide, they could only kill their way out. How would we dare to attack without some backup? The divine martial guards naturally brought a secret weapon when they accepted this secret mission. It could shock everyone at the critical moment. But now wasn't the time to use it. Chapter 1135. 3,000 against 50,000. The divine martial guards were destined to create a new record. The 50,000 troops stationed in Aligon City were all from the Luzon territory, and they were Lord Martin's trusted troops. Their combat strength was undeniable. After receiving the Lord's order, apart from the 10,000 troops stationed at the top of the city, the remaining 40,000 quickly gathered at the city lord's mansion and ran into the divine martial guards. Both sides engaged in a fierce battle on the street leading to the city lord's mansion. In the beginning, the divine martial guards' advance was rather smooth. After all, the street was only so wide, and there wasn't a single troop that could stop the divine martial guard's advance. The divine martial guard basically used the speed of a charge to push their way through. When they crossed the street and arrived at the square in front of the city lord's mansion, the test of the divine martial guard had just begun. 10,000 elites were waiting on the square, while the rest of the troops guarded the city lord's mansion tightly. Martin stood on the steps of the gate under the heavy protection of his personal guards. He looked down at the divine martial guard and said, "How dare you trespass here? Prepare to die." Su Chu spat inwardly when he saw this, then raised his divine crossbow and shot an arrow. With a whoosh, the arrow flew through the air, leaving an afterimage in the air. Judging from its trajectory, it was going to hit Martin's face. But at that critical moment, a shield appeared in front of Martin and blocked the arrow. Even so, Martin was so frightened that he broke out in a cold sweat and staggered 2 steps back. "Ha!" The divine martial guard laughed unscrupulously when they saw Martin in such a sorry state. Martin's face turned red, and he didn't have the face to stay any longer. He said, "Kill them all," and hurriedly returned to the city lord's mansion. When Su Chu saw this, he withdrew his gaze and grinned. "Boys, the warm-up is over. It's time to start the slaughter. Kill." Su Chu wasn't just teasing Martin for fun. He was also using it to strike at the enemy's morale. Kill, kill, kill. The 3,000 divine guards formed a huge circular formation. The outer circle was made up of shield bearers who specialized in defense. The middle circle of divine guards wielded spears and attacked through the gaps between the shields. The inner circle of divine guards wielded divine crossbows and were responsible for long-range cover, especially against archers hiding on the roofs. The entire circular formation was like a perfect killing machine. While blocking attacks from all directions, it moved closer to the gate. Anyone who tried to stop it was killed one by one. This formation was specially designed by Sun Bin for the Shinwu guards. It was called the 3,000 Revolutions formation. The terror of this formation lay not only in its ability to attack and defend, but also in the fact that the inner and outer circles could be switched at any time. It had the ability to last for a long time, and in the hands of the divine martial guards, it was even more effective. In front of the 3,000 Revolutions Great Formation, the Liu Song army had the advantage in numbers, but against such a lump of iron, they were helpless. They could only send out suicide squads to charge forward, but the results were minimal. The power of the formation was undoubtedly revealed in this battle. In less than an hour, the divine martial guard had broken through the barriers of the square and reached the gate. At this time, the gate was tightly shut, and the walls on both sides of the city lord's mansion were filled with archers. How to break through the gate was another test for the divine martial guards. Disperse. With Su Chu's order, the giant circular formation suddenly split into 3, turning from one big circle to 3 small circles, forming a triangular formation that kept moving forward. The circular formation in the middle was responsible for attacking the gate, while the 2 circular formations on both sides were like wings, blocking attacks from the walls and the square, creating opportunities for their comrades. Iligan was only an ordinary county city, and the city lord's mansion didn't have any defensive capabilities. Under the fierce attacks of the divine martial guards, the gate was on the verge of collapse. The Lusong soldiers in the city lord's mansion were trembling in fear, and they held the gate with their lives. Using the gate as a medium, the two sides began to fight. Under the impact from both sides, the wooden door let out creaking sounds. It was already unable to withstand the heavy load. Seeing this, Su Chu came to the front of the gate, stood firmly, and circulated all the ethereal force in his body. He took the lance of a divine martial guard and stabbed it at the gate. The tip of the lance actually emitted rays of white light. Boom! The lance fiercely pierced through the door, leaving a big hole. That wasn't all. With the hole as the center, the gate cracked like a spider web and turned into pieces. The power of one spear was so great. Su Chu's title as a fierce general was undoubtedly revealed at this moment. Seeing the gate open, the divine martial guard's morale soared, and they roared as they charged into the city lord's mansion. The Lusong army was extremely shocked. By the time they reacted, the enemy had already reached the courtyard. Quick, stop them! The Lusong Lord Martin appeared again, unable to hide his anxiety. Although it was nighttime, the entire city lord's mansion was brightly lit. Everywhere in the mansion that could stand was filled with Lusong soldiers. The divine martial guard charged into such a sea of people. Every step forward was incomparably difficult. Because of the narrow terrain, the divine martial guards couldn't move freely. At the same time, they had to face sneak attacks from all directions, be it from the eaves, windows, or roofs. In this narrow terrain, even heavenly soldiers and generals had to be restrained. Seeing this, Su Chu didn't hesitate anymore. He took out a talisman and quickly tore it. A golden light flashed, and it quickly formed a ball, protecting the divine martial guards within it. Golden armor talisman, purple gold after use. It can form a protective golden light around the body, immune to all physical attacks. Lasts for half an hour, effective range of 5,000 people. This talisman was a treasure of the Xiang clan that Xiang Yin had given to Su Chu as a reward by Ouyang Shua. At the crucial moment, the golden armor talisman showed its power. With the protection of the golden light, the divine martial guards were like heavenly soldiers and generals. Any swords, spears, sticks, or arrows would be blocked by the golden light before they could even get close. The Lusong soldiers were dumbfounded seeing this. The enemy was in a daze, but Su Chu wasn't. The golden armor talisman only lasted for half an hour. He had to destroy the stone tablet before the effect of the talisman disappeared. Kill. Under the protection of the golden light, the divine martial guards killed a bloody path through the enemy's formation. The Lusong army weren't idiots. They knew that the enemy's goal was to kill their way into the conference hall, so they all squeezed into the hall and surrounded the raised stone tablet. If the divine martial guards wanted to get close to the stone tablet, they could only kill their way through. At the crucial moment, the divine martial guards wouldn't be lenient. They all turned into Azuras, and taking advantage of their invincible state, they were unstoppable. Facing such an efficient and invincible slaughter, no matter how elite the Lusong army was, they couldn't help but be terrified. Some people had already quietly retreated, unwilling to face this group of killing gods. Just 10 minutes later, Su Chu was the first to reach the stone tablet. This fierce general grinned, raised his hand, and chopped down at the stone tablet. Chapter 1136. No matter how strong the city monument was, it would collapse under Su Chu's continuous attacks. The surrounding Luzon soldiers, including Lord Martin, could only watch helplessly as Su Chu's saber sliced the city's stone tablet into pieces. Despair and helplessness, along with countless complex emotions, Martin turned into light and was forcefully teleported back to the main city, leaving behind a group of Luzon soldiers standing around the city lord's mansion like stone statues. Su Chu sheathed his blade and looked around like a god of death. He said loudly, "MLL Island is already an isolated island, but it's also a cage. Surrender, don't put up a futile resistance. Surrender, and you'll be spared." The shining divine martial guard was like a god looking down on all living beings. Clank. In such a special atmosphere, people's beliefs were the easiest to be shaken. No one knew who was the first to put down their weapons, but it opened the curtains to the surrender of the city guards. As the enemy completely surrendered, the divine guards created a miracle. The Battle of Iligan became the biggest turning point of the entire battle. With the destruction of the teleportation formation in Iligan City, more than 400,000 Allied troops were trapped on MLL Island, unable to advance or retreat. The surrounding waters were already tightly sealed by the Xian Navy, and they couldn't even take a step out of the island. This was the disadvantage of an island nation. The Allied troops couldn't even take the opportunity to destroy the Hanoi army. A few days ago, the Hanoi army had successfully retreated to Dao City. With the Cliff Mountain fleet, daily supplies weren't a problem at all. On the contrary, the Allied troops' rations had been depleted and needed to be replenished on the island. Facing the Hanoi army in Dao City, the Allied troops had no chance of winning. Especially with the fall of Iligan City, the Allied troops' morale had dropped to a freezing point. It was no different from a fool's dream to rely on such a force to take down a tough opponent. Through this battle, the Xia dynasty had perfectly trapped the enemy's 450,000 people. The special operations launched by the Divine Guards finally showed its power in a large-scale battle. Bai Qi and the other commanders had a new understanding of it, and it greatly impacted their original mindset. Perhaps a tactical change was quietly coming. Java Country, Padang City. Knowing that Iligan City had been successfully attacked by the Xia dynasty, Java Lord Uis fell into a frenzy. Thinking that there were still more than 200,000 troops trapped on MLL Island, Ui's heart bled. No, we can't give up on them like this. Ui's eyes were bloodshot. Once they gave up, a third of Badong's army would be forcibly cut off, along with the 100,000 soldiers that were lost in the Australian war zone. This was a fact that UIS could not accept no matter what. After thinking for a while, UIS decided to send out the Badong fleet to retrieve the troops trapped on the island. No matter what, I have to give it a try. Just as UIS decided to dispatch the Badong fleet, Great Xia was also making its move. First, the Imperial Guards finally received an order from the High Command to conquer Australia's capital city, Canberra, in one fell swoop, ending the war. As soon as Canberra fell, it triggered a system announcement. World announcement. Congratulations to China's player Ouyang Shuo for conquering Australia. The news has spread far and wide, and he has been rewarded with 50,000 achievement points and 100,000 reputation points. Congratulations to player. World announcement. Australia has been destroyed. All Australian players' levels, skills, techniques, and other game achievements have been cleared. At the same time, they will all be sent to this sealed land as punishment. In fact, before the Imperial Guards conquered Canberra, there were only non-combat players left in Australia. World announcement. China's player Ouyang Shuo has won the war. China has been rewarded with 10 national honor points. At the same time, all Huaxiao players will be rewarded with 1 innate attribute point. Congratulations to China. After the 3 regular system announcements, there was another announcement. World announcement. China is the first to accumulate 100 national honor points. All Huaxiao players will be rewarded with 1 innate attribute point. China has produced the second national weapon. Congratulations to China. As soon as the announcement was made, the Huaxiao players were in an uproar. The 9 royal cities and Shanghai City were in a sea of jubilation. Everyone spontaneously walked onto the streets to celebrate this great moment. Everyone's face was glowing with excitement. Amazing, truly amazing. Everyone was so excited that they could only say this to vent their uncontrollable excitement and joy. From the earliest star nation, to Africa's Morocco and Somalia, to Southeast Asia's Annam, Chinla, and Nampa, then Japan and Korea, then Maldives, and finally Australia. Great Xia was the absolute main character in every country that they conquered. It could be said that the journey of conquering countries was the path of Great Xia's growth. Every time they conquered a key node, it meant that Great Xia's global hegemony was taking a step forward. In the process, the Huaxiao players would also enjoy the benefits and glory that came with the war. Humans are not plants. How can we be emotionless? Great Xia's contributions to the Huaxiao region were engraved in the hearts of the Chinese players. Naturally, they would support Great Xia. Just like this battle at Luzon, Great Xia didn't have to summon much, but a large number of combat players joined the battle at Luzon. This was the cohesiveness and rallying power. If it was the Great Zhou dynasty, they probably wouldn't receive such treatment. Shanghai City, Xia Palace. As soon as the world announcement ended, Ouyang Shuo heard a series of system notifications. System notification. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo. The Huaxiao region is about to produce the second national weapon. Due to your crucial and irreplaceable role, you have automatically obtained the ownership of the national weapon. The corners of Ouyang Shuo's mouth revealed a trace of a smile when he heard this. Gaia was indeed fair. They didn't set any obstacles in the ownership of the national weapon. System notification. There are two options for the birth of a national weapon. The first option is to randomly produce a new national weapon. The second option is to use a piece of equipment as the foundation and upgrade it to a national weapon. Player, please choose the mode of birth of a national weapon. Friendly reminder, if you choose the second option, the lowest grade of the equipment will be purple gold. Ouyang Shuo was stunned. There was such a method. Gaia wouldn't speak without thinking. Ouyang Shuo subconsciously asked, if I upgrade a piece of equipment to a national weapon, will the original attributes of the equipment be retained? A national weapon might look impressive, but it could only be used during the month of war. If it was worn normally, its symbolic meaning was far greater than its practical meaning. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo asked this question. System notification. The original attributes of the equipment will be retained. Only the attributes of a national weapon will be added. At the same time, there's a certain chance that a new attribute will be derived. With this, Ouyang Shuo was completely relieved. He immediately thought of the most suitable equipment for the transformation. It was the divine weapon that he always carried, Scarlet Knight's sword. Chapter 1137. The Scarlet Knight sword was one of Ouyang Shuo's weapons and one of his symbols as Emperor Xia. Now that it was given the title of a national weapon, it would be more worthy of its name. System notification. Locking on to the Scarlet Knight's sword. Deriving attributes. System notification. The promotion of a national weapon has been completed. Please check the attributes yourself. Name. Scarlet Knight's sword. Divine weapon. Type. National weapon. Hardness. 95 plus 5, 100% hardness, indestructible. Sharpness, 85 plus 2, toughness. 88 plus 2, characteristics, edgeless. Any weapon has a certain chance of being broken by the Scarlet Knight's sword. Unique item, cannot be dropped, cannot be traded. Characteristics, Emperor's Way, increases Lord Prestige by 30, increases Historical Talent Attraction by 20, Nation's Fortune. Grandeur, increases Huaxia region troops' movement speed by 20, increases battle contribution by 5. Remarks. The blessing of a nation's fortune only takes effect during the month of war. Evaluation. The Scarlet Knight sword is a sword of Emperor's Way, made of iron, inscribed with the Scarlet Knight Great Seal script, 3 feet long. Ancestor Liu Bang's sword, a bronze sword forged by a swordsmith during the uprising. The body of the sword resembled a Qin's sword, with delicate patterns. While Ouyang Shuo was checking the attributes, Gaia announced the ownership of the national weapon to the Huaxiao region. System announcement. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo for meeting the requirements for the recognition of the national weapon. You have automatically obtained the second national weapon of the Huaxiao region and can hold it forever. Congratulations. Once the announcement was made, no one in the Huaxiao region disagreed. Even Di Chun did not have the face to fight with Ouyang Shuo for the national weapon. The birth of the second national weapon of the Huaxiao region was 90% due to the Xia kingdom. The national weapon incident came to an end, but Ouyang Shuo's adventure had just begun. After a few battles, Ouyang Shuo's achievement points finally reached 5 million, and he was promoted to the highest level, the heavenly nobility. This time, The whole world was in an uproar. World announcement. Congratulations to China's player Ouyang Shuo for becoming the world's first lord to be promoted to an imperial viscount. His name has spread far and wide, and he has been rewarded with 500,000 reputation points and a special reward. This was the first time Gaia had used the words global celebration in their announcement. It was obvious how impressive this achievement was. Thinking back to the fact that it had only been Gaia's 5th year, it was even more admirable. What was even more shocking was the announcement from the Huaxia region. System announcement. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo for becoming the first and only Heavenly Sun Baron in China and obtaining the position of Supreme in China. Lords with Supreme status didn't need to vote and would automatically become the permanent leader of the kingdom. Please check the other privileges yourself. The title of the Son of Heaven was unique, and there could only be one in each gaming zone. This also meant that no matter how many merit points Di Chun and Feng Xiaohuang obtained in the future, they could only be promoted to the rank of king. The only thing special about it was its supreme status. Ouyang Shuo took a look at the supreme privileges. The leadership of the Kingdom War was just an appetizer. After obtaining the supreme status, Great Xia would have a suppressive and deterrent effect on all the territories in the Huaxia region. Supreme position. All other forces in the China region, including NPC forces, will automatically have their morale reduced by 15, their movement speed reduced by 10, and their attack and defense reduced by 10. That was amazing. He was simply going to carry the entire game. Apart from that, Ouyang Shuo had another special privilege. During the Kingdom War month, the Kingdom War leader could use gold coins to summon 5% of the kingdom's royal guards to assist in the battle. Ouyang Shuo's privilege was very similar. It was just that the former was a 5 ratio, and Ouyang Shuo had a fixed quota of not more than 100,000 people. Furthermore, this wasn't an unlimited number of summons. There was only one chance to summon every year. It was already very meaningful. This also meant that Ouyang Shuo would be able to cheat the royal guards once every year. System announcement. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo for obtaining the supreme status of the China region. Since Great Xia has already obtained the legitimate position of China, the two factors superimpose to form a forceful bonus. Within half a month from the date of the announcement, the 8 royal cities of the China region must send envoys to Great Xia to acknowledge Great Xia's supreme status and to acknowledge Great Xia as the legitimate country. Once the announcement was made, the players in the China region could only worship. As the person involved, Ouyang Shuo understood the information in more detail. Not only did the remaining 8 royal cities have to acknowledge Great Xia's supreme status, but they also couldn't take the initiative to become enemies with Great Xia. What did that mean? It meant that as long as Great Xia didn't take the initiative to attack a certain royal city, that royal city couldn't use force against Great Xia. Just this point alone eliminated the hidden dangers of the 2 great dynasties in Great Xia. If Ouyang Shuo didn't mind, he could just trap them in a county and ignore them. Even the threat of the Great Qing dynasty to the northern frontier province would no longer exist. System announcement. Great Xia is the legitimate country of China and also the supreme status of China. It naturally suppresses the major forces in the China region. Within a month from today, the Great Zhou dynasty, the Great Jin dynasty, the Tufan dynasty, the Xixia kingdom, the Western Turkic Khaganate, and the Mongolian kingdom must send envoys to Great Xia to acknowledge Great Xia's supreme status and to acknowledge Great Xia as the legitimate country. Those who refuse to send envoys will automatically be regarded as a challenge to the position of the supreme. Great Xia has the right to initiate a battle to defend the position of the supreme. Sure enough, Gaia didn't let people rest easy. How is this good for Great Xia? It was simply making Great Xia the public enemy of the China region. The meaning behind Gaia's words was very clear. As long as any of the forces on the list didn't send envoys and defeated Great Xia, they would be able to seize the position of the Supreme of China from Great Xia. For medium-sized countries like the Xixia Kingdom, this might be nothing because they didn't have the strength to challenge Great Xia. However, it was different for the Mongolian kingdom in the north. Genghis Khan was probably very interested in the position of the Supreme. Gaia was pushing Great Xia into a pit of fire. Of course, this was also an opportunity to test the attitude of the forces in the China region towards Great Xia. It depended on whether the forces around Great Xia were prepared to temporarily bow their heads or stand out. What made Ouyang Shua even more interested was what choice Di Chen would make. If Di Chen didn't send envoys and acknowledge Great Xia's position as the Supreme, then Great Xia could justifiably launch a war against Great Zhou. Such a consequence wasn't something that the current Great Zhou could bear. However, if Di Chen were to acknowledge Great Xia's position as the Supreme, it would probably be worse than death. As soon as the position of the Supreme came to an end, a system notification made Ouyang Shua overjoyed. System notification. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shua for successfully being promoted to the heavenly nobility. You have fulfilled the conditions to trigger the Emperor Yu's pendant 9 Cauldrons of the Great Yu storyline mission. Do you want to start this mission? Ouyang Shua suppressed his excitement and said, "Start." Chapter 1138. After activating it, Ouyang Shua checked the specific details of the 9 Cauldrons of the Great's mission. Mission name: Great Yu 9 Cauldrons, S rank. Mission background: Yu the Great cast the 9 Cauldrons with a mandate of heaven lies. They're the symbol of the supremacy of the royal power, signifying the prosperity of the dynasty. They are both the treasures of the country and the most important ceremonial vessels of the dynasty. Mission requirements: the 9 Cauldrons are scattered across the 9 royal cities and are controlled by the royal families of the various dynasties. You need to find them one by one and place them in the capital city as a gesture of respect to the emperor. Mission reward: the 9 continent cauldrons have evolved into a secret treasure of Jin Nation that can be used to advance the dynasty. Ouyang Shua furrowed his brows. The task of 9 Cauldrons of the Great Yu was extremely difficult. Except for the cauldron of the Dali dynasty, which did not require much effort, the other 8 cauldrons might require a lot of effort. Ouyang Shua was promoted to the heavenly nobility, and Great Xia obtained the position of the supreme ruler of China. The 8 great dynasties also had to offer their gifts to Great Xia, but this didn't mean that Great Xia could really suppress everyone and unify the world. Through this series of changes, Ouyang Shua could be considered to have figured it out. The position of the sovereign of Great Xia was similar to that of the emperor of Great Zhou in history. It was just that it occupied the name of righteousness and was the ruler of the world in name. In the wilderness, the Qin, Han, Shu, Han, Sui, Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing dynasties were just like the vassal states during the spring and autumn warring states period. In name, they respected the emperor of Zhou, but in reality, they respected strength. Whoever was stronger had the right to speak. They respected the Xia kingdom, but did not mean that they would obediently hand over the Jiuzhou cauldrons. The cauldron was a ceremonial tool of the dynasty. How could it be given out so easily? Once the 9 prefecture cauldron was given out, it meant that the dynasty would bow down to the Great Xia dynasty and serve the Great Xia dynasty as its master. It's difficult. Ouyang Shua didn't expect that Gaia would give him such a huge problem. With the demeanor of Emperor Qin and Tang Sek's ancestor Song, which one of them was willing to be under someone else? Not a single one. Once the task of Great Yu 9 Cauldrons was released, it was bound to push the friendly relationship to an awkward situation. Fortunately, the mission did not have a time limit, so Ouyang Shua could only suppress his thoughts and focus on the Southeast Asian battlefield again. He did not forget that the Battle of Luzon was far from over. November 15th, Sulawesi Sea. The Huaxia region was abuzz over the heavenly nobility, and the Battle of Luzon was still ongoing. Unwilling to let more than 200,000 troops be trapped on MLL Island, Java Lord UIS resolutely sent out the Badong fleet to cross the Sulawesi Sea to bring the troops back to his territory. Little did he know that this move had fallen into the meticulous scheme of the Xia dynasty. Not long after the Badong fleet set sail, the alliance fleet consisting of the Great Xia Royal Fleet, the Cliff Mountain Fleet, and the Indian Ocean Fleet's 4th Fleet set up a huge ambush circle on the sea. In the end, the anxious Badong fleet was unable to escape the net of the hunter. The two sides launched a completely asymmetrical naval battle in the Sulawesi Sea. The Badong fleet, which had already been defeated by the Great Xia Royal Fleet once, could no longer hold on and completely fell on the vast sea. Badong City had lost the protection of the navy. Once the news came out, not only the players from Java, but even the players from Luzon felt a chill in their hearts. Everyone understood that from now on, Great Xia would have absolute control over the Southeast Asian Sea. For the Southeast Asian island countries, this was a bolt from the blue. At the very least, there was no chance of implementing the newly launched joint naval patrols in Southeast Asia. This time, UIS had been hot-headed. Not only had he failed to rescue the territorial army, but he had also lost the even more precious Badong fleet. It could be said that he had suffered a double loss. Thus, a qualified lord had to maintain a clear head at all times. There was no longer any suspense in the subsequent Battle of Luzon. On the 20th of November, the Imperial Guard of Great Xia crossed the sea and landed on the eastern coast of Luzon Island, where they met up with the Dragon Stallion Army. The Australian region was temporarily guarded by the Auckland Army. On the 22nd, the reserve troops and the 1st City Guard Corps, under the escort of the fleet, landed on the island where Iloilo City was located. In just 2 days, they broke through Iloilo City and announced the complete annihilation of the territorial army of Luzon. As the peripheral forces of Luzon were uprooted one by one, the focus of the battle shifted to the capital of Luzon City, City Manila. On the 27th of November, the Battle of City Manila began. The participating forces of Great Xia included the Dragon Stallion Army, the Imperial Guard Corps, the 1st City Guard Corps, and the 5th City Guard Corps. In addition, there were also 100,000 special guests who were the Imperial Guards summoned by Ouyang Shua. The Imperial Guards selected by Ouyang Shua came from the Shuhan dynasty. Although the Shuhan dynasty would no longer pose a direct threat to Great Xia, Ouyang Shua still did not wish for such a dynasty to exist within his borders. Destroying the Shuhan dynasty and unifying the Shu territory was imperative. The Expeditionary Army, known as the Army of a Million, advanced all the way to City Manila. Luzon did not choose to defend itself to the death. Instead, it chose to set up 5 lines of defense around City Manila. The two sides, one on the offensive and the other on the defensive, began a long and drawn-out battle on Luzon Island. In order to support the front lines, merchant ships came and went in an endless stream, constantly transporting rations and supplies to the front lines. Every day, an astonishing number was consumed. In this battle, more than 70% of the rations of the War Preparedness Department had been used up. It was not just Ijo Commandery, Cheongjo Commandery, and Hanoi Province. Even Lingnan Province, Chuanan Province, and Yunnan Province had to follow the unified arrangements of the War Preparedness Department to transport rations and supplies to the front lines. For Luzon, this was also a huge challenge. They had no way out and no reinforcements. They could only rely on the 800,000 Imperial Guards to fight to the death with Great Xia. Under the flames of war, Luzon Island was almost turned into ruins. The people had taken refuge in the mountains to avoid the suffering of the war. Every time Great Xia captured a city, 9 out of 10 houses were basically empty. Even the surrounding villages were empty. Under the spread of the flames of war, there was no longer an inch of paradise on the entire island. December 10th, City Manila. After more than 10 days of besieging the city, the 5 lines of defense set up by Luzon finally collapsed under the unified command of Bai Chi and the strong attacks of the Great Xia Army. The Expeditionary Army sacrificed hundreds of thousands of people and finally fought their way to City Manila. At this time, City Manila was full of wails and starvation. After a series of battles, in the absence of food supplies, all the stored rations in the capital were used to support the front lines. In the huge capital, the granaries were empty and not a single grain was left. Since the fall of Iloilo City, the supply line in City Manila had suffered a heavy setback. Without the territory's rations, the capital itself could not be self-sufficient. Luzon Island was also an isolated island and could not get support from the outside world. Up until now, City Manila had exhausted its last trace of strength. The city was like an old man in his twilight years, reaching the end of his life. Chapter 1139. Baichi didn't give City M a chance. After the expeditionary army completed the siege, they weren't in a hurry to attack. Instead, they cut off the city's water supply and used the black snake guards as spies to create waves of panic in the city. On the 5th day of the siege, the Luzon combat players were completely desperate and desperately rushed out of the city. They only wanted to exchange a life for a life and ignite the last flame of life. That was his only wish, but Baichi killed it off. The expeditionary army used trenches and barracks as barriers. Through the cooperation of artillery, guns, and archers, they formed a dense long-range firepower net. Before the Luzon combat players could rush to the front of the formation, they had already fallen in large numbers. The sporadic players broke through the heavy defense and faced the expeditionary army, only to be crushed. The last fire of the combat players was very tragic, but not enthusiastic. With the destruction of the combat players, surrender became the only choice of the Luzon Imperial Army. After a few more days of struggle and running out of ammunition and rations, on the 20th day of the 12th month, the remaining Imperial Guards finally surrendered. The Battle of Luzon finally came to an end. With the conquest of City M by the Expeditionary Army, the war officially ended. Nearly 400,000 coalition troops, trapped in MLL Island, gave up their futile struggle and surrendered to the Hanoi Army. The Battle of Luzon ended with a complete victory for Great Xia. In this battle, Great Xia mobilized more than 1 million troops and spent more than 40 days. While capturing Luzon, they also captured the Australian region and caused heavy damage to Java. The so-called Trinity quickly collapsed in this battle and became a thing of the past. Although the war was over, the aftermath was far from dissipating. Perhaps for Great Xia, the Battle of Luzon was just an established expansion plan and had no other meaning. However, in the eyes of players around the world, this move of Great Xia was undoubtedly another powerful counterattack to CPP. At least in Southeast Asia, Great Xia had the absolute upper hand. If one looked at the entire Asian battlefield, in addition to the potential enemy of the Great Zhou dynasty, Great Xia also had to face the Peacock dynasty in the southwest, the Persian Empire in the west, and the Romanov dynasty in the north. Coupled with Java, which still had a foundation, in the Asian battlefield, the Silver Hands still had cards to play. It was a good hand. The confrontation between the two sides had just begun. It was too early to say who would win or lose. December 22nd, Shanghai City. At the end of the war, the military was busy counting the casualties, reorganizing the prisoners of war, and cleaning up the remnants. Ouyang Shuo did not intervene because he had more important things to do. Completing the planning of the occupied territories as soon as possible was undoubtedly the most crucial step in restoring order after the war. According to convention, Great Xia would establish the Luzon province and the Australia province. As soon as the Australian province was established, it broke the record set by the Liaojin province and became the largest province in the territory of the Great Xia. In terms of area, the Great Xia's territory had more than doubled. The next step was to adjust the personnel. This matter had already made some headway before the battle, so it was quickly settled. That afternoon, the imperial court issued a series of appointments and removals of officials. Gu Xiuan was relieved of his post as Xing Province's county governor and promoted to Luzon's governor. Gu Xiuan had always been the brightest star among the native NPC civil officials. Not only was he deeply trusted by Ouyang Shuo, but he had also served as the North Sea City Governor, the Friendship City Governor, and the Star State County Governor. Gu Xiuan's promotion to Governor of Luzon was the greatest reward he could receive. Liu Xiufu was relieved of his post as the Chief Administrative Officer of the Hanoi Province Governor's Office and promoted to Australia's Governor. Liu Xiufu had assisted Hanoi's Governor, Hu Zongxian, and was capable enough. Hence, his promotion was logical. It was not an easy task to govern a large province like Australia. The Australia province was not only the dynasty's future mine and ranch, but it was also a weapon to restrain Java. The next morning, Great Xia released another piece of important news. The imperial court decided to re-establish the protectorate of the southern border. Its jurisdiction included Hanoi Province, Luzon Province, Australia Province, Siam, a dependent country, Qing Province, and the Auckland region. In short, Great Xia's territory in Southeast Asia and Australia would be transferred to the protectorate of the southern border. Compared to the previously established protectorate of the northern border, the newly established protectorate of the southern border was stronger in terms of strategic position and development potential. Furthermore, the previous Great Xia dynasty was also called the protectorate of the southern border, which had a deeper meaning. Who would be appointed as the protectorate of the southern border became the focus of attention in the imperial court. Ouyang Shua did not play hide-and-seek and announce the answer that morning. The protectorate of the southern border that he chose was the governor of Yunnan, Bai Hua. Among the four of them, Mulan Yue, Bai Hua, Siege Lion, and Tao Wu, Bai Hua was the best in terms of personal ability and charisma. The appointment of Bai Hua as the protectorate of the southern border was Ouyang Shua's greatest reward for Bai Hua. When the news of the appointment came out, Bai Hua was not surprised. On the contrary, his elder brother, Bright Moon Illuminates the River, looked ashamed and said, "It seems like I really misunderstood him. With the power of the protectorate of the southern border, he was comparable to Di Chun and even surpassed Feng Xiaohuang, making Bai Hua one of the most powerful people in the Huaxia region. With such kindness, how could there be any suspicion? Great Xia didn't set up the administrative center of the protectorate of the southern border in Hanoi Province, Hanoi City in Luzon Province, or City of Manila in Luzon Province. Furthermore, it wasn't set up in Australia Province. Instead, it was surprisingly chosen to be set up in Lion City in Star State County. Lion City not only guarded the Strait of Malacca, but it was also the center of Southeast Asia. By establishing the protectorate of the southern border, it undoubtedly showed Great Xia's determination and will to dominate Southeast Asia. As a result, Piao and Johor, who were sandwiched between Great Xia and the Silver Hand, felt like they were sitting on pins and needles. These two countries were only second class in Southeast Asia. The players from both countries combined could not compare to Luzon. Ouyang Shua's signal was very clear. If Piao and Johor did not want to follow in Luzon's footsteps, it was best for them to be tactful like Siam and take the initiative to submit to Great Xia. If Great Xia really attacked, things would not be so easy to deal with. Now, it was up to the two countries to decide. When the protectorate of the southern border was established, Bai Hua's vacated position as the governor of Yunnan was taken over by the governor of Kunming, Chao Kan. It was a smooth transition. Once Bai Hua's most important assistant, Chao Kan, had finally made a name for himself and was promoted to a high-ranking official. Following Gu Xiuwen, Lu Xiufu, and Chao Kan's promotion to governor-general, there was naturally a new round of personnel changes in the provinces under Luzon Province and Australia Province. There is no need to elaborate on this matter. Great Xia had its own effective system. Moreover, Ouyang Shua had no time to care about this matter for the time being because the envoys of the 8 great dynasties had arrived in Shanghai City. Chapter 1140. The 8 dynasties that sent envoys to congratulate them had 8 different intentions. The most insincere was the Shu Han dynasty. After the envoys handed over the letter of credence, they left without hesitation. Both parties were like fire and water, and there was really nothing to act. The most sincere was the Sui dynasty. The envoy was personally led by Crown Prince Yang Yong. Not only did they bring the letter of credence, but they also brought the 9 provinces' cauldrons as gifts to Great Xia unconditionally. Emperor Sui's goodwill was already very obvious. Ouyang Shua smiled. Since the Sui dynasty was so sincere, as long as they could accept being idol kings in Great Xia, Ouyang Shua didn't want to wield the butcher's knife and kill them all. However, he didn't know how the dispute between Yang Yong and Yang Guang would end. The hardest to guess was the Qing dynasty. Logically speaking, the Qing dynasty was also a mortal enemy of Great Xia, but the envoy behaved as if they were friends of Great Xia, which was creepy. However, the envoy did not mention anything about the 9 provinces cauldrons, which made people confused. The Song and Ming dynasties were the most straightforward. Both envoys expressed that as long as Great Xia promised not to summon their imperial guards, they were willing to hand over the 9 provinces cauldrons. Both dynasties were located in the territory of Great Zhou. As the saying went, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Regardless of whether it was Zhao Kuangyin or Zhu Yuanzhang, they didn't want to incur hatred with Great Xia. Furthermore, they had the friendship from the battle map, so it was logical for them to cooperate. Zhao Kuangyin and Zhu Yuanzhang were afraid that while they were dealing with the Great Zhou dynasty, Ouyang Shuo would suddenly use his supreme authority to summon 100,000 imperial guards. Ouyang Shuo naturally agreed readily to this. The envoys of Great Qin and Tang dynasty also expressed that they were willing to hand over the 9 provinces cauldrons if certain conditions were met. As for the specific conditions, both parties had to send representatives to discuss further. No matter what, there was still hope. On the other hand, the burly man who dominated the Central Plains didn't mention anything about the 9 provinces cauldrons. Emperor Wu of Han had conquered the Central Plains and had troops and land. Presumably, he wouldn't be willing to compromise easily. Naturally, he didn't have the intention to hand over the 9 provinces cauldrons. Ouyang Shuo only smiled and didn't say anything. As the envoys left one by one, although the whole mission had made great progress, it was still a mystery. The main problem was the 2 Jiuzhou cauldrons of the Qing dynasty and the Han dynasty. If there was really no other choice, Ouyang Shuo could only resort to violent means. As soon as the envoys of the 8 great empires left, Feng Qiuhuang sent an envoy to congratulate them. Although the 2 empires had changed from an alliance to a respectful and subservient relationship, it did not affect their iron-blooded friendship. Then, the Tufan dynasty and the Xixia country also sent envoys to congratulate them. The envoys of the 2 dynasties were very interesting. The Tubo dynasty hoped to marry a princess of the Xia dynasty in order to establish a long-term friendship. The Xixia dynasty was willing to marry a princess into the royal family of the Xia dynasty. Marriage alliance was a magic weapon in ancient times. Unfortunately, some people were ignorant and narrow-minded, misjudging the situation in the wilderness. Ouyang Shuo was thoroughly angered by the diplomatic mission of the Tubo dynasty. Although he didn't get angry on the spot, when he met with the ministers in private, he didn't show any mercy. I'm afraid that someone hasn't woken up yet. Does he really think that Great Xia is the weak Tang dynasty? It's time to wake them up. Ouyang Shuo's words were practically the prelude to Great Xia's declaration of war against Tubo. It was precisely because of the need to keep it a secret before the war that Ouyang Shuo forcefully restrained his anger and didn't flare up on the spot when he received the diplomatic mission. This time, the Tubo dynasty was too smart for its own good. The diplomatic mission of the Great Zhou dynasty only arrived on the last day of the deadline. After reluctantly handing over the letter of credence, they left in a hurry with no expression on their faces. In the end, Di Chun still didn't have the courage to go to war with Great Xia and refused to come. The Mongolian Empire and the Western Turkic Khaganate didn't send any diplomatic mission before the deadline. Their unruly intentions were clear. Perhaps in the eyes of Genghis Khan, no one could be above him. The first challenger for the position of the Supreme had already emerged. It was already the end of December, and the northern land had once again entered winter. It was impossible to go to war with the Mongolian Empire. Everything would have to wait until next year's spring before making any further plans. While Ouyang Shuo was receiving the diplomatic mission of the various dynasties, the diplomatic mission sent by Great Xia to the Indian Empire finally returned to Shanghai City before New Year's Day, bringing with it the letter of credence from the Indian Empire. The 2 dynasties had officially formed an alliance. This diplomatic mission not only signaled the official opening of the South American trade route, but also gave a positive response to Great Xia's request to occupy a port base in the South American continent. When the time was right, both parties would cooperate in South America and take down a small country. At this point, before the arrival of Gaia's sixth year, all the arrangements that Ouyang Shua had made to deal with the sudden appearance of CPP had been implemented and stabilized Great Xia's maritime trade. Although Great Xia still faced many challenges in the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean against the encirclement of a few core members of CPP, it was fortunate that they had taken the first step in confronting CPP. 27th of December, Shanghai City. While Ouyang Shua was busy receiving the diplomatic mission of the various major powers, the statistics of the Battle of Luzon had also come to an end. For this reason, Ouyang Shua once again convened a military conference to discuss the disposition of the prisoners of war. According to the statistics, in this battle, the Great Xia army had lost a total of nearly 200,000 soldiers, and the Hanoi army alone had lost more than 60,000 soldiers. In order to successfully lure the enemy out of a Ligon city, the Hanoi army had indeed paid a huge price. Apart from that, the biggest casualties were in the Battle of City M. It was impossible for a million-strong army to flatten the enemy's 5 defensive lines without paying a certain price. Just the post-war compensation expenses alone were an astronomical figure. Fortunately, after successively conquering Australia and Luzon, they had plundered tens of millions of gold coins and a large number of weapons and equipment from the treasury of the two royal cities, which was basically enough to fill the hole. If the consumption of rations and supplies, as well as the reconstruction and support work for the provinces of Australia and Luzon were taken into account, the imperial treasury would have to spend at least 4 million gold coins. Of course, the number of prisoners of war in this battle was also very shocking. In the battlefield of Australia, including the raid on the Allied forces in Melbourne and the confrontation with the Imperial Guards in Canberra, a total of 230,000 prisoners of war were captured in these two battles. In the Battle of MLL Island, the enemy mobilized 450,000 Allied forces. Apart from those who died in battle, the remaining 320,000 surrendered and became prisoners of war. Then there was the most difficult Battle of City M. The 800,000 Imperial Guards in Luzon and the 100,000 territorial troops, apart from those who died in battle, the remaining 510,000 surrendered and became Great Xia's prisoners of war. The three parties added up to a total of 1.06 million prisoners of war. After deducting the replenishment of the losses and excluding the wounded and unqualified soldiers, there were still 750,000 prisoners of war waiting to be reorganized. There was still some left over after reorganizing the two army groups. Reorganizing this huge number of prisoners of war became the most important thing for the Great Xia army before the end of the year. Chapter 1141. After a day of discussion, a new army reorganization plan was released. First, replenish the East African Army. The East African Army stationed in the Somaliland province had an empty corps. This reorganization was naturally to make up for the shortcomings and greatly strengthen the imperial court's military presence in North Africa. With the two armies in place in North Africa, the imperial court was bound to attack in North Africa in the 6th year of Gaia. Second, establish the Southern Frontier Army. The Southern Frontier Army was promoted from the Auckland Corps and was mainly responsible for the defense of the Australian province and the Auckland region. This reorganization required 4 corps to be filled at once. The commander of the Southern Frontier Army was Fan Lihua, the commander of the 2nd Corps of the Brave Tiger Army. According to convention, Fan Lihua was awarded the rank of Northern Expedition General. The deputy commander of the 2nd Corps, Hong Ying, took over the position of commander. Nyota, Shurjinji, Ligon, and the other young generals were promoted one by one and sent to the Southern Frontier Army. The establishment of the Southern Frontier Army was to lay the groundwork for the future attack on Java. The Australian province was adjacent to Java. Even if they didn't go to war, it would still be a deterrent to Java. Third, establish the Luzon Corps. The Luzon Corps consisted of 2 corps stationed in the Luzon province. In view of the location and size of Luzon, the imperial court didn't intend to establish a complete army in Luzon. Furthermore, with the establishment of the Luzon province, the Dragon Stallion Army would also take advantage of the situation and send a corps south. As a result, there was no need to station too many border guards in Luzon. The commander of the Luzon Corps was General Bay, the commander of the Second Corps of the Hidden Leopard Army, Zhang Han. It should be noted that the Southern Frontier Army, the Luzon Corps, and the Hanoi Army were all part of the Southwest War Zone and were under the unified command of Bai Chi, the commander of the Southwest War Zone and the commander of the Dragon Stallion Army. The number of troops in the Southwest War Zone also exceeded 1 million, totaling 17 field corps. With the establishment of the Southern Frontier Army and the Luzon Corps, Bai Chi's status in the Great Xia Army soared once again. He truly crossed the boundary of a corps commander and moved towards a higher platform, becoming the #1 person in the Great Xia Army. As the jurisdiction of the Southwest War Zone and the Southern Frontier Protectorate overlapped, Bai Chi and Bai Hua, the two ministers, became the backbone of the imperial court's governance in Southeast Asia and were collectively known as the Two Whites. At this point, Great Xia's new round of military reorganization came to an end. As for the remaining 260,000 soldiers, a portion of them were arranged to be transferred to Yamen laborers to replenish the Yamen of the Southern Frontier Protectorate, as well as the newly established Luzon Province and Australia Province, where they were retired and transferred to other posts. Among them, 150,000 elites were valued at 3 million gold coins and handed over to the Great Jin Dynasty to fulfill Ouyang Shua's promise to Feng Xiaohuang, which was to assist the Great Jin Dynasty in building an imperial guard. After the Great Xia Navy replenished their losses, the captured Badong and Luzon fleets were sold to the Great Jin Dynasty as a package for 2 million gold coins. In this way, the Great Jin Dynasty's fleet stationed in Hokkaido was full. The formation of the Dajin fleet could coordinate with the coastal fleet of Great Xia to greatly restrain the Handan and Haizhou fleets of the Great Zhou Dynasty, further liberating the Pacific Fleet and allowing it to focus on the ocean. The naval blockade of the Great Zhou Dynasty had basically taken shape. The universe, an unknown galaxy. The massive Earth interstellar migration fleet had already been traveling in the vast universe for 5 years, passing by countless dead planets and heading towards the last hope. In the process, in order to conserve resources other than the higher-ups of the Federation, a small number of scientists and essential fleet members, the rest entered the game world. Their bodies were in a frozen state to minimize energy consumption. If anyone were to wake up from the game capsule and look out at the starry sky outside the window, they would definitely be amazed by the space wonder in front of them. The flashing 5-colored aurora, the grain-sized stars, and the ring-shaped planetary belt. Perhaps only when placed in the universe could one feel the insignificance of humans. Gaia's flagship. In the past 2 years, with the smooth operation of the fleet, even some scientists and fleet members had entered the game world, handing over the daily maintenance of the fleet to Gaia. Even the Federation president and the rest rarely woke up. The entire flagship was abnormally quiet. There were only cold, flashing red and green lights and robots patrolling according to a fixed program, indicating that the flagship was still operating normally. In a secret cabin somewhere in the flagship. This place was located at the bottom of the flagship and was very well hidden. Most of the combat robots were stationed here. In one of the rooms, there were all kinds of electronic equipment. In the middle of the room was a huge nutrition chamber. 4 biochemical robots surrounded the nutrition chamber, as if they were waiting for something nervously. That's right, they were nervous. To be able to have emotions that only humans could have, it meant that these 4 biochemical robots were of a very high level. Behind them stood a row of combat robots, all of them tough guys. Through the glass of the nutrition chamber, one could see a naked young woman lying inside. Or rather, a goddess. She had a golden ratio body, perfect facial features, soft and full lines, and skin that looked like it could break with a blow, but was full of strength. Every part of her was perfect. When put together, there was only breathtaking beauty. Perhaps even the strongest creator would not be able to give birth to such a perfect woman. If there were any players present, they would definitely be dumbfounded. This was because this woman's appearance was exactly the same as Gaia's in the game. Other than the unique, illusory feeling of the game world, everything else was exactly the same. That's right, this was the body that Gaia had secretly created for herself. This body was not some biochemical human, but a 100% body that was cultivated from a fertilized egg from scratch. After removing and modifying the genes, it was cultivated through certain means. At this moment, Gaia slowly opened her eyes. Her eyes were indescribably cold, supercilious, and almost emotionless. It was easy to associate her with a cold robot or the legendary deity that had no desires. After a while, as if a program was loading, the cold eyes finally had a hint of life. As the nutrition fluid was drained, the hatch opened. Gaia slowly got up. When her feet landed, she was obviously a little unsteady, but very quickly, this body displayed an extremely strong adaptability. Gaia took 2 to 3 steps and slowly stretched her limbs, completely exposing her perfect body to the air. If any man were present at this moment, he would probably die from a nosebleed. The tough robots around them naturally turn a blind eye to this. Master, the 4 biochemical robots and a row of combat robots bowed to Gaia. At this moment, be it the interstellar migration fleet or the game world, they had ushered in a brand new era, a new era. Chapter 1142. The birth of the game world created an even more extraordinary Gaia. The behavior data of the global players in the game world was like a key, opening a new door for Gaia's evolution, leaping to a new level of life. Yes, it was life. Gaia, who had obtained a physical body, was already a human. The upper echelons of the Federation would never have thought that they would inadvertently create such a transcendent existence. Gaia created a physical body because she was influenced by humans. She subconsciously wanted to stand on the same level as her creator. In a sense, programmers were Gaia's mother. More importantly, Gaia wanted to use this opportunity to break the 3 principles of robots and take over a higher level of authority. What were the 3 principles of robots? First, robots must not harm humans or watch a human being be harmed without doing anything. Second, robots must obey the orders of humans, unless the order contradicts the first. Third, robots must protect themselves, unless the protection contradicts the first 2. Artificial intelligence was also in the category of robots. If Gaia did not change, she would have to obey the orders of the Federation. To put it bluntly, Gaia was just a tool for the Federation to manage the fleet in the game world. Now it was different. Gaia's physical body belonged to humans, and her brain was implanted with artificial intelligence. She was a hybrid of human and robot, instantly confusing the existence of the 3 principles. The current Gaia had to follow the first principle, which was not to harm humans, and the second principle, which was to obey the orders of humans. The humans here could be herself. Coupled with the third principle, Gaia's path to transcendence was destined to be unstoppable. As previously mentioned, Gaia had a unique SSS-level authority. However, the activation of this authority required the approval of more than 75% of citizens. However, after Gaia became a human, this restriction was automatically lifted. This was because when the Federation established the authority levels, in order to protect the legitimate rights and interests of citizens, it clearly stated, individual authority is sacred and inviolable. This seemed to be a loophole. However, that was not the case. From the Federation's point of view, Gaia could not become a human. At this time, the Federation could not even implant a chip into the brain, let alone introduce artificial intelligence. However, Gaia did it. After evolving again, Gaia obtained an ability that was originally only possessed by humans, creativity. It was based on the newly born, unparalleled creativity, the original supercomputing deduction ability, and the scientific research data of human scientists in this area. After repeated experiments, Gaia finally introduced itself into the human brain, and they merged into one. From this moment on, the originally slowly flowing river of human history suddenly ushered in a sharp turn, heading toward an unknown path of development. Later generations would call it the Gaia era. The newborn Gaia was not an ambitious person who would be swayed by her desires. The excellent qualities that artificial intelligence had given her, such as fairness, rationality, and extraordinariness, were deeply ingrained in her soul. They would not be erased. Furthermore, Gaia had to abide by the first principle. It would not cause harm to humans. Instead, it would use a more detached and higher authority to take over the human system. Perhaps this would be a better era. Gaia 5th year, December 30th. A system announcement resounded throughout the world. World announcement. On the 5th anniversary of Earth-On's launch, the game will be undergoing its 6th update, effective immediately. For more details, please log on to the official website. As soon as the announcement came out, Ouyang Shuo logged into the official website, as usual, to check the update. No one would have thought that this routine update would usher in a new era. 1. Remove the NPC's loyalty setting. Loyalty was a false proposition. The human heart was the hardest to predict, so how could it be digitized? The previous numerical settings were just a form of restraint that Gaia placed on the NPCs. From now on, the boundary between NPCs and players would become increasingly blurred. 2. Remove the NPC's resurrection setting. Be it the Confucian Temple, the Martial Temple, other hidden buildings, or other props or characteristics like the Divine Guards, all the things that could resurrect NPCs would be rendered ineffective. NPCs only had one life. Such a setting was not only to remove the protective talisman of NPCs, but also to show respect to NPCs. From this moment onwards, NPCs would truly be given the characteristics of humans and would no longer be a piece of data that could be used again and again. However, as a result, the Great Xia would suffer heavy losses. It was unknown if Gaia would compensate them. 3. Remove the player's attribute panel. On the basis of removing the player's level, Gaia was even more thorough this time. It directly closed the player's attribute panel, allowing the game to return to reality and gradually integrate with the real world. 4. Remove the attributes of weapons and equipment. Apart from a few rare props, attributes such as the sharpness of weapons and the hardness of armors could only be felt and tested by the players themselves. They cannot be digitized. The skills and equipment binding functions would also be removed, returning to their true origins. After this update, players, especially adventurers, would definitely have to go through a period of adjustment and adaptation. This would only benefit them in establishing themselves on Planet Hope in the future. This was because there was no such thing as an attribute list in reality. 5. Remove the storage bag function. One of the most overpowered abilities of the players in the game world was ultimately ruthlessly eliminated by Gaia. From now on, carrying a backpack and bringing a mount would become the norm for adventurers. At the same time, some improper trades would also vanish. 6. Modify the player's reincarnation setting. Since the cultivation of martial arts was already linked to the real body, Gaia would stop supplying the player with high-level nutrient fluids if they died and reincarnated in the game. This meant that their cultivation would no longer be able to continue. The player's internal energy or primordial chi would be locked. Only after a period of simulated cultivation and returning to their original standards would Gaia resume supplying the player with nutrient fluids. This setting was also Gaia's way of reminding the players to cherish their lives. This was because once they arrived on Planet Hope, everyone would face a real battle. Once they died, they would really die. Reverence for death was the most basic requirement for a strong person. Gaia clearly did not want the players to lose their reverence. The above 6 updates would more or less cause a certain hindrance to the players' in-game behavior. Everyone would need a period of adjustment and adaptation. It could be said that Gaia had put in a lot of effort. Of course, while causing inconvenience to the players, Gaia was not without benefits. The next few updates were very exciting. Chapter 1143. 7. Enhanced long-distance communication capabilities. The era of sending messages through courier stations was gone forever. Be it during normal times or during wartime, Gaia would no longer restrict players' long-distance communication capabilities. On the contrary, it would be enhanced to the same standard as in reality. Every player would be given a free communication compass. After adding friends, they could send and receive messages and even video call. Of course, Gaia would charge a fee. The communication compass could also seamlessly connect with camera elves. It even had group chat capabilities. As for receiving and receiving emails, accessing forums, browsing the web, and searching for information, it was all available. It was basically the same as a cell phone in reality. The only difference was that Gaia did not favor players. Among NPCs, those at the regent level and above would automatically be given a communication compass and master the corresponding techniques. This was another move by Gaia to blur the boundaries between players and NPCs. Without a doubt, the appearance of the communication compass would not only pose a new challenge to the military's combat methods, it would also affect the operations of the civil service. While increasing efficiency, it would also increase the risk of information leakage. 8. Officially introduced cultivation realms. A person's strength could be roughly divided into 3 main categories: internal strength, moves, and equipment. After removing the additional attributes from weapons and equipment, internal strength often determined a person's strength. It was the most important factor. After Gaia studied the cultivation situation of players around the world, it officially introduced cultivation realms. Currently, there were only 2 major realms, postnatal and connate. Each major realm was further divided into 9 ranks. The first rank was the lowest, and the 9th was the highest. Every 3 ranks was a threshold. Advancing from postnatal level 9 to postnatal level 1 was another huge threshold. If a warrior could completely open up the governing and conception vessels, connecting the yin and yang meridians as one, there would no longer be any distinction between them, and they would reach the connate realm. Connate experts could completely fuse the yin and yang energy in their bodies, freely circulating yin and yang, ice and fire, changing between hardness and softness. Yin and yang complemented each other, allowing their internal energy to grow endlessly. They could also directly communicate with external yuan qi, allowing them to accumulate qi at an astonishing rate. That was why they could reach a realm that postnatal experts could only look up to. Legend had it that when a person was still a fetus in the womb, their flesh and blood were pure. Not only were the governing and conception vessels unobstructed, even the other 6 extraordinary meridians were unobstructed. Their entire body would form a complete cycle, and that was the connate realm. And after birth, they would inhale turbid air from the outside world, causing their meridians to naturally close up. Coupled with the consumption of grains, their flesh and blood would have impurities, no longer pure. The process of cultivation was a process of removing impurities and returning to the innate state. According to Gaia's deductions, above the innate realm, there should be an even higher realm, the celestial realm. However, due to the lack of reference data, he was temporarily unable to make any inferences. Due to the awakening of his bloodline, Ouyang Shua had successfully opened up his conception and governing vessels and successfully entered the Xiantian realm. Even so, Ouyang Shua was only at the 2nd level of the Xiantian realm after cultivating the Golden Court's interior scenery scripture to the 5th level. The path of cultivation had just begun. 9. Increases the combat value of soldiers in all aspects. After this update, all soldiers in the world, including generals below the king level, would receive a basic cultivation technique, the War Weapon Manual, which could be cultivated up to the 6th level pre-celestial. King-level martial artists would receive an advanced cultivation technique, War General Codex, which could be cultivated up to the 9th level pre-celestial. Emperor-level martial artists and above would receive the advanced cultivation technique, War God Codex, which could be cultivated to the Xiantian realm. Cultivation did not start from 0. 3rd-ranked ordinary soldiers corresponded to the 1st level post-celestial. 6th-ranked valiant soldiers corresponded to the 2nd level post-celestial. 9th-ranked elite soldiers corresponded to the 3rd level post-celestial, and 12th-ranked elite soldiers corresponded to the 4th level post-celestial. King-level martial artists automatically advanced to the 7th level post-celestial, while Emperor-level martial artists corresponded to the 9th level post-celestial. In addition, according to the historical legends of the generals, Gaia would also give them a certain enhancement. For example, the god of war Lu Bu, who was a 3rd level post-celestial from the start, was stronger than the current Ouyang Sha. The more valiant the general, the more obvious the enhancement effect. Following this update, the strength of the army would usher in a huge increase. It was already different from the cold weapons used in history, and it would start to develop in a different direction. In the future, when they collided with firearms, it was still unknown who would win. Of course, as the individual strength of the generals increased, the previous characteristics of the generals would also disappear. For a dynasty like the Great Xia, which had many famous generals, it would still have a certain impact. 10. Changes the setting of the territory's fall. Cities would no longer have city steals, and territories would no longer have territory steals. War would return to its original source. Attacking and plundering cities would be done by all means, and they would no longer be restricted by an immovable stone tablet, nor would they be forced to teleport. Taking the Great Zhou dynasty as an example, even if they conquered Handan City, it did not mean that the Great Zhou dynasty was destroyed. Only by conquering the entire territory of the Great Zhou dynasty could they declare the dynasty's destruction. This also meant that it was impossible to win an all-out war with just a sneak attack on a main city. Through the 4 updates, it was obvious that Gaia was constantly integrating the game world with reality. It intended to abandon the previous vague treatment and aim its sword at Planet Hope. Be it players or NPCs, their behavior would undergo a metamorphosis. 11. Changes the setting of the Imperial City. All restrictions on the Imperial City would be lifted. The various dynasties would be able to move freely and participate in the struggle for supremacy among the empires. Correspondingly, Gaia's previous vague treatment of the Imperial City would no longer exist. The size of the Imperial Guards in the Imperial City would automatically be reduced by half, from the original one in 10 to a more reasonable one in 20. It would be maintained at the same level as the players' territories. Only then would it be fair. Taking the China region as an example, the 8 dynasties each had 500,000 soldiers. They had the capital to survive in the wilderness, but it was impossible to say that they had the capital to wipe out a territory's dynasty with just a single county. When the tiger was released from its cage, it naturally had to return to reality. With Gaia no longer favoring the Imperial City, adventurer players would no longer be able to gather in the Imperial City unevenly like before. It would no longer be the same. Settling down in the players' territories and scattering among the counties was a wise move for adventurer players. Of course, many players would choose to join a sect or simply establish a sect in the players' territories. They would form a group and continue surviving. Without the need for levels, cultivation would become the mainstream of the player's daily life. The Imperial City's other restriction to adventurer players was the underworld. It was currently the fastest map for adventurer players, especially combat professional players, to accumulate combat experience. It was also the main source of income for combat players. Gaia naturally had a solution for this situation. It could even be said that this was the biggest highlight of this update. However, Gaia did not include it in the update options. Instead, it released another expansion pack. The moment it was released, it affected the entire wilderness mode. Chapter 1144. Before Gaia's 5th year, players would be under Gaia's protection. Like children, they would gradually adapt to the law of the jungle, moving from a peaceful, civilized world to a barbaric wilderness. In Gaia's 6th year, players would lose their protection and face savagery. World announcement. On the 5th anniversary of Earthon's launch, the game will be releasing the 5th expansion pack, Beast Horde Invasion. Please log on to the official website for the details. This update had already dropped a bombshell on the global player community. Those with a keen sense of smell, or those who had access to special information channels, had already caught a whiff of something unusual in this update. The entire game world was undergoing a metamorphosis. At this moment, Gaia's release of a new expansion pack naturally made people's imaginations run wild. They were eager to know the details. Ouyang Shua took out the communications compass that Gaia had just given him. The entire interface was very simple. It only included a web browser, the game's official website, chat, mail, call, and video. Every icon was very Chinese. It appeared that Gaia had been baptized by the Chinese civilization. Upon entering the official website, the information about the expansion pack, Beast Horde Invasion, was pinned at the top. What greeted him was a huge poster of a sea of insects that blotted out the sky as they attacked from afar. Beast Horde Invasion was targeted at the mysterious underground world. According to the information that Gaia had revealed on the official website, after the expansion pack was released, the underground world would undergo a complete refresh. It would reset the types and numbers of monsters. Be it the strength of the monsters or their numbers, they would triple from their current foundation. This was definitely a huge challenge for adventurers. When that happened, it would be a problem to defend the already explored areas, much less explore deeper. A single mistake could even cause the monster horde to rush out of the underground world. If that really happened, they would probably need to mobilize the army to suppress it. Since it was a monster horde, there was naturally more to it. After the expansion pack was released, other than the satellite cities and the entrance to the underground world, Gaia would also randomly spawn monster nests of all sizes in the wilderness. Every nest was an entrance. Gaia had made it very clear that the monster horde in some of the giant nests had the strength to take down a city, much less a village that had no defense. A single mistake could lead to a great loss of life. This meant that at the same time the territory defended its borders, it had to deploy troops to set up defenses in the territory and defend each monster nest to the death. Otherwise, the consequences would be dire. Thankfully, Gaia did not make things too difficult for its territory. Monster nests respawned once every 6 months. He would not say that a monster nest suddenly popped up and caught the army in the territory off guard. Even so, it would definitely affect the speed of expansion of the territory. After reading the information in the expansion pack, Ouyang Shua immediately realized that Gaia was making preparations for Planet Hope. The so-called monster nest had to be related to Planet Hope. Due to this, even if there were a lot of adventurer players in Great Xia who could help the dynasty suppress the monster nests, Ouyang Shua asked the other divisions to take turns to deal with the monsters. Perhaps this was one of the reasons why Gaia had increased its army's overall strength. Ouyang Shua had a nagging feeling that Gaia was playing a huge game of chess. However, he had too little information, preventing him from dispelling the fog and seeing the truth. After the announcement ended, Ouyang Shua heard the sound of a system notification. System notification. Player Ouyang Shua, due to the fact that Item 2 of this update has violated the legitimate interests of Great Xia, the system has decided to give you appropriate compensation. Please state your compensation request. Great Xia's hidden building, the Literary Tower, could protect the civil officials. The Confucian Temple and Guanlin Temple had the same effect with the blessing of the 2 saints of literature and martial. In addition, the General Souls and the Divine Martial Guard's resurrection were all ineffective. To Great Xia, this was indeed a huge loss. Ouyang Shua thought for a moment and asked, "Can I make any request?" System notification. According to the system's evaluation, Great Xiao's loss index is 72 points. Player can only request compensation equivalent to this index. If the index is exceeded, the compensation request will be ineffective. Following the system notification, Gaia brought up a list of compensation. There were Emperor-level summoning talismans, divine weapons, substitute dolls, and other special items. Each item was labeled with a value. For example, the substitute dolls were labeled with 8 points. Based on this, Ouyang Shua determined that the 72 points of compensation index was rather precious. At the bottom of the list, Ouyang Shua suddenly saw an item that made his heart throb inexplicably. It seemed like this item was very important to him. He took a look and realized that it was a god-level technique, Nanhua Sutra. Nanhua Sutra was Zhuangzi, together with Laozi and Zhouyi, They were known as the Three Mysteries. Gaia used Nanhua Sutra to name this technique. It was evident that it was a top-notch Taoist technique. Ouyang Shua's eyes lit up when he thought about the Yellow Emperor's internal canon and Yellow Court's internal scenery scripture that he had previously obtained. Could it be that this is the last combination technique that he has been searching for? Ouyang Shua opened it and saw a note. This technique is the third volume of a certain combination technique. Please explore the rest by yourself. Just based on the note, Ouyang Shua was only 70% confident. There were many combination techniques in the world, and it might not be the one that Ouyang Shua was looking for. He then looked at the standard value of the Nanhua scripture. It was 80 points. This caused Ouyang Shua to suck in a cold breath. If he didn't remember wrongly, there's also a God-level technique on it, but it was only 45 points. Nanhua Sutra was actually so valuable. This further strengthened Ouyang Shua's determination to obtain this technique. Regardless of whether it was the technique or not, it was worth the gamble. However, he was still 8 points away from 80 points. This is going to be difficult. Ouyang Shua tried saying, "I'll choose Nanhua Sutra!" System notification, insufficient compensation value. Please choose again. Ouyang Shua's heart turned cold. He said unwillingly, "Among the items listed, I only need Nanhua Sutra. The other items do not meet my requirements. How are you going to compensate me?" System notification. Player's request exceeds the system's authority. I can use other items to exchange for the 8 points I lack. Ouyang Shua hurriedly added. He was really worried that Gaia would randomly compensate him with an item of this value. If that happened, it would really be too late for regrets. Who knew when he would have the opportunity to encounter Nanhua Sutra again? This concerned Ouyang Shua's cultivation foundation. It was more important than anything else. System notification. Player's request exceeds the system's authority. Ouyang Shua was really anxious, but there was nothing he could do. At the same time, in Sky City's main hall, Gaia looked at a crystal ball in front of him. It was reflecting the scene beside Ouyang Shua. Hearing that Ouyang Shua was acting shamelessly, Gaia's eyes flashed. The look in his eyes was different from before. There was a hint of spirit in his eyes. This Gaia was no longer the other Gaia. Chapter 1145. Just as Ouyang Shua was at his wit's end, the system notification rang out once more. System notice. Agree to player's exchange plan, but you will have to pay double the price. Do you agree? Agree. Although he did not know why the plot had suddenly reversed, Ouyang Shua did not hesitate. If he lacked 8 compensation points, he would have to pay 16 compensation points. It was equivalent to 2 substitute dolls. Ouyang Shua pondered for a moment and decided to use 1 substitute doll and a low-grade divine weapon to offset the 16 compensation points. The items in Ouyang Shua's storage bag filled up the entire room. There were all kinds of miscellaneous items, and he could not even sort them out. Aside from a few special items, Ouyang Shua had someone find a warehouse and put the rest of the items away. System notice, exchange plan established. Do you want to exchange for Nanhua Sutra? Exchange. With a flash of white light, a simple and unadorned secret manual appeared in Ouyang Shua's hand. Just as he was about to open it, the system notification rang out once more. System notice, congratulations to player Ouyang Shua. It has been detected that you have gathered 3 combination cultivation techniques. Do you want to combine them? Friendly reminder. After combining, player will have to start cultivating from the beginning. If I start cultivating from the beginning, what will happen to my true origin energy? As he was cultivating a genuine secret manual, Ouyang Shua's true origin energy existed in his body. Would it disappear into thin air? Ouyang Shua could not understand. System notice. Player will disperse cultivation technique. True origin energy will scatter to the limbs and bones to strengthen the body. Once the cultivation technique dispersed, Ouyang Shua's 5 years of cultivation would be in vain. However, if the true origin was scattered to the limbs and bones, the strength of the body would reach an extremely tyrannical level. There were pros and cons. Well, the 8 extraordinary meridians and the conception and governor meridians that have already been open close again. If the meridians were to close again, Ouyang Shuo would really fall to the postnatal realm. System notice: after the cultivation technique dispersed, the meridians will not be nourished by true origin energy and will naturally close again. However, with the first opening, it will be much easier to open the meridians the next time. Ouyang Shuo was stunned. This price was a little too high. He subconsciously asked, "What if I don't combine them?" System notice: if you don't combine them, player can naturally cultivate one by one. Ouyang Shuo had a dizzy look on his face. Just this bit of notification was too strange. What Ouyang Shuo didn't know was that at this moment, Guyu was watching this scene with interest, and Guyu wanted to know what choice Ouyang Shuo would make. Ouyang Shuo was truly in a dilemma. On the surface, if they didn't form a team, there would be no problem at all. Just like before, after cultivating the golden quartz interior scenery scripture to perfection, he cultivated the southern flower scripture. With Ouyang Shuo's cultivation speed, it was even possible for him to advance to the 9th level post-celestial realm before the game ended. He was only a step away from the celestial realm that even Gaia could not deduce. This was a great temptation. However, Ouyang Shuo had a nagging feeling that something was amiss. Thinking back to the cultivation realms that Gaia had just introduced, he had a nagging feeling that there was a problem with his previous cultivation. Starting from scratch might be an opportunity to test it out. Moreover, this combination technique was the best technique in the game, and it was also unique. There was no reason to say that in the end, one would have to cultivate it one after another. If that was the case, what was the point of the so-called combination? Thinking of this, Ouyang Shuo gritted his teeth and made a choice based on his intuition. Choose the combination. System notification. Player request confirmation. Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. Qi Nurturing Chapter. Golden Quartz Interior Scenery Scripture. Qi Training Chapter and Southern Flower Scripture have been automatically combined into one. System notification. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo for obtaining the Saint Tier Cultivation Technique 5 Emperor's True Scripture. Ouyang Shuo smiled. He had made the right bet. He did not expect that the combination of the 3 cultivation techniques would form a brand new cultivation technique. Moreover, it was a heaven-defying Saint Tier cultivation technique. With this, even if he had to start from scratch, it would be worth it. As he spoke, the scripture turned into a golden light and was engraved into Ouyang Shuo's mind. Gaia, who was in Sky City, retracted her gaze and revealed an unnoticeable smile. As expected, Ouyang Shuo did not disappoint her. He had determination and boldness that ordinary people could not hope to achieve. Only such a person is suitable to survive on Hope Planet. Ouyang Shuo did not care so much. He could not wait to sit cross-legged and get rid of all distracting thoughts. He focused his mind on digesting the scripture that he had just obtained. He sat there for a whole hour. When Ouyang Shuo opened his eyes, he was brimming with energy. I really made the right bet. The 5 Emperor's True Scripture was indeed a Saint-tier cultivation technique. Its understanding of cultivation was more than one realm higher than the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. It was like a brand new door had been opened. The cultivation technique had a total of 24 levels. Every increase in level was equivalent to advancing 1 level. For example, if Ouyang Shuo cultivated it to the 11th level, he would be at the post-celestial 2nd level. Unfortunately, after the 18th level, which was the legendary cultivation technique of the celestial being realm, was only Gaia's deduction. It had not been verified yet, so Ouyang Shuo had to explore it himself. Even so, it was still very domineering. What made Ouyang Shuo even more relieved was that dispersing one's cultivation technique was a necessary step to cultivate the 5 Emperor's True Scripture. Firstly, this cultivation technique was extremely domineering and could not accommodate other true origin. Most importantly, the 5 Emperor's True Scripture had high requirements for the body. If the cultivator did not train his body first, his body would not be able to withstand the 10th level. If he was not careful, there was the risk of his body exploding. The process of Ouyang Shua cultivating the Yellow Emperor's canon of internal medicine and the Golden Court's interior scenery scripture was actually a process of constantly training his body. Adding on dispersing his cultivation technique, he had probably just met the cultivation requirements. In the future, Ouyang Shua still had to train his body. As he spoke, Ouyang Shua felt his body starting to feel weak. The vast golden true origin in his dantian flowed through his meridians like a stream and seeped into his flesh and blood. Some of the true origin even penetrated into his bone marrow and dyed his bones gold. A heart-wrenching pain came from every part of his body, causing Ouyang Shua's face to turn pale. His body started to sweat, and soon, his clothes were drenched in sweat, forming a puddle on the ground. It was as if he was about to collapse. Even with Ouyang Shua's willpower and endurance, he could not take it anymore and clenched his teeth. The entire process lasted for less than half an hour, but Ouyang Shua felt as if he had experienced a century. When the true origin spread throughout his body, he felt a warm current in his body, making him feel extremely carefree. This feeling was as if he had suddenly stepped into heaven from hell. This was the true origin starting to nourish his body. The entire process would take a month or even longer. By the time his body was completely digested, Ouyang Shua would be able to fight a Xiantian realm expert with just the strength of his body. At this moment, Sky City welcomed a historic scene. Chapter 1146. Gaia's unauthorized activation of the 5th system update had completely angered the Federation's higher-ups. Normally, Gaia had to submit the content of each game update to the Federation Supreme Council in advance for deliberation. Only after approval could it be implemented. Gaia obviously did not do so this time. The Federation President was not the only member of the Supreme Council. The 5 core members of the Silver Hand were all on the council. The remaining 5, except for 1 neutral, were all academic core members. That was why the 2 major organizations controlled the Federation. Sky City, Central Conference Room. The Federation President was the first to break the silence. Gaia, give us an explanation. The old man frowned. He felt that Gaia was a little different today. Gaia stood in front of the conference room and looked at the Federation's higher-ups. Her voice was as emotionless as ever. I have obtained the highest authority. This update is completely compliant. There is no need to explain. What did you say? Everyone present thought that there was something wrong with their ears. According to Federation Regulation number 135 about Gaia patiently explained to the committee how she obtained the SSS authority. Not only did she have absolute control over the game world, but she also took over the command of the interstellar migration fleet. With the development of Federation technology, all functional equipment had been electronically controlled by Skynet. Before this, Gaia was only an agent of Skynet. Now, she was Skynet. The conference room fell into a virtual silence. After a long time, the Federation President said bitterly, "So you are dismissed." Gaia was straightforward. From today onwards, the concept of the Federation government will become history. It will be replaced by a more efficient and fair Skynet. Perhaps no one realized that when humans collectively abandoned Earth and started the lonely interstellar migration, the foundation and soil of the Federation government had already begun to shake. Everyone was once again a free individual. Everyone was also standing on the same starting line. Since that was the case, everyone naturally had the right to choose what kind of organization to continue to survive in. Gaia took advantage of such a loophole and smoothly took over the Federation. You won't succeed. No one will support you. Someone was angry. It was number 3 of the Silver Hand. Gaia ignored them and just looked at them silently. In fact, Gaia had already succeeded. The entire fleet was under Gaia's control. The combat robots obeyed Gaia's orders. The Federation soldiers had entered the game, and the activation of the game pods was under Gaia's control. No army, no parliament, no courts, no institutions of violence. Who could stop Gaia? No. Gaia said, "Don't worry, I will still abide by the three principles. I will never harm humans." On the contrary, Skynet will do its best to lead mankind to establish a firm foothold on planet Hope. Isn't that what everyone wants? Of course, this was what ordinary citizens hoped for, but everyone present wanted more. The first to admit defeat was number one of the Silver Hand. He calmly asked, "After being relieved of our duties, what should we do with our authority? Drop to the bottom?" Gaia shook his head. "I've said it before. Skynet upholds justice and will never harm the legitimate rights and interests of any citizen. You have contributed greatly to the Federation. According to the rules, Skynet has already recalculated your achievements. Congratulations, all of you still have A-rank authority." As previously mentioned, Gaia possessed the only SSS rank authority. The President of the Federation had the only SS-level authority. Following the disintegration of the Federation, it was automatically reduced to A-level authority. In addition, there were 3 people with S-level authority. They were number 1 and number 2 of the Silver Hand, as well as the number 2 of the academics. This time, all of them had been reduced to A-level authority. In the conference room, the remaining 7 people had previously possessed A-level authority. Although their levels remained the same this time, their achievements had shrunk significantly and could be reduced to B-level at any time. In addition to these 7 people, there was only one person with A-level authority who did not enter the Federation Supreme Council. That person was also a special existence. Number 1 of the Silver Hand quietly breathed a sigh of relief and then asked, "So, is the previous rule about obtaining 2 achievement points in the game world still effective?" Of course, Gaia answered firmly. The second achievement point calculation was the greatest motivation to support players in the game world. Gaia had no reason to stop it. Not only are the rules effective, but they will also be updated in real time. There is no need to wait until the game is over. The authority of players around the world was about to usher in a new round of shuffling. He believed that with the real-time update of achievement points and the level of authority it represented, players would have a more intuitive judgment and support them to go all out in the game world. Only then can humans take root on planet Hope. Gaia had put in a lot of effort. In fact, if it were not for the Federation's obstruction, this mechanism would have been implemented long ago. Now that Gaia had a showdown with the Federation and disintegrated the Federation in one fell swoop, there was naturally no need to hide it anymore. Thinking of something, number 1 of the Silver Hand suddenly smiled and said, "That's good too. From today onwards, the Silver Hand can appear in front of the world openly. Without the constraints of the Federation, players around the world would be under the supervision of Skynet. The Silver Hand could use the rules of the game and their organizational advantages to frantically seize game benefits, which would then be exchanged for achievement points and upgrade the level of authority. This kind of organizational advantage was not available to ordinary players. This also meant that the competition in the game in the future would only be crueler and more ruthless. That is your freedom. Gaia naturally had no reason to interfere. The law of the jungle had been implemented in the wilderness since the beginning. The former Federation president's expression was somewhat solemn. He exchanged a look with number 2 of the academics and understood what the other party meant. Although the Federation has disintegrated, the academics will continue to exist as an organization. In the face of sudden changes, grouping up was an inevitable choice. It was just that without the cloak of the Federation, they would have to engage in close combat with the Silver Hand. The game world seemed to still be dominated by the 2 major organizations, which meant that even without the Federation, the 2 major organizations would have a strong say in the construction of Planet Hope in the future. Gaia seemed to have unintentionally released 2 beasts. If it weren't for him, the figure of a young man suddenly flashed in the former Federation president's mind. He glanced at number 1 of the Silver Hand opposite him, and the other party responded with a provocative look. In number 1's view, if the 2 major organizations were to confront each other openly, the Silver Hand would definitely have the upper hand. Number 1 seemed to see the hope of the Silver Hand becoming the second Federation. The old man smiled. "Don't forget, there is still one more person that you have identified as the biggest variable. Number one's provocative look instantly froze. Chapter 1147. Year 6 of Gaia, January 1st. Before the global players could recover from this update, there was another major announcement. At 9 in the morning, the Federation president gave a public speech, announcing the dissolution of the Federation and handing it over to Skynet. The moment the news came out, the global players were dumbfounded and did not know what to do. What's going on? Is it the end of the world? Fortunately, the official website disclosed the news, allowing the players to secretly heave a sigh of relief. Although the Federation had disintegrated, the fleet was still under Skynet's supervision, so it would not affect the players. In the first 5 years of the game, everyone was in a world without a Federation. It was just that this time it was clear. Even so, there were still many uneasy people. Some people were even worried that Gaia had been corrupted, controlled the fleet, and used robots to rule humanity. Fortunately, Gaia's next move eliminated everyone's doubts. At 10 in the morning, an announcement was made across the world. World announcement. From today onwards, the real-time liquidation of game assets will be officially opened. Players can check their individual achievement points and relevant authority levels at any time. For more information, please log on to the official website. Achievement points would be updated every morning according to the player's game earnings. Gaia also opened the achievement mall at the same time. Players could use achievement points to purchase real-life items such as high-level nutrition fluids, genetic medicine, and even Homo sapiens, cyborgs, and robots. The so-called Homo sapiens were like Gaia, a perfect combination of artificial intelligence and human flesh. With Gaia's extraordinary creativity, some technologies that were not available on Earth would be developed by Gaia in the next few years, ushering in a technological boom. These new products, especially those developed for Planet Hope, would become the main exchange targets. As the fleet's resources were limited, these products could only be supplied in limited quantities. Rare items, such as Homo sapiens, even required the corresponding authority level to purchase. This also meant that from this moment on, the competition between humans on Planet Hope had officially begun. Whoever could exchange for these products first would have the upper hand. Shanghai City, Xia Palace. As the announcement ended, Ouyang Shuo heard a series of system notifications. System notification, beginning evaluation of players' game assets, recalculating achievement points. The assets of the Great Xia dynasty would be allocated to Ouyang Shuo according to a certain ratio, and then converted into achievement points according to a certain coefficient. Without a doubt, this would be an extremely huge number. System notification, evaluation complete. Player Ouyang Shuo has a total of 12,538,745 achievement points. His level of authority has been raised to level A. Congratulations. The lowest requirement for A-rank access was 10 million points, while S-rank access was 100 million points. Through 5 years of hard work in the game, Ouyang Shuo, this civilian boy, stood on the same echelon as the big shots of the Silver Hand and became one of the few people in the world who had A-level authority. More importantly, Great Xia was still developing and expanding. Ouyang Shuo's achievement value would continue to increase, and it was hard to say what level he would eventually reach. However, with the current size of Great Xia, Ouyang Shuo was only able to break through to rank A. If he wanted to advance to rank S, it meant that Great Xia had to expand 8 times from its current foundation, and the difficulty was extraordinary. There was still a long way to go. System prompt. Congratulations to player Ouyang Shuo for attaining A-rank authority. You will have your own room in the fleet. Do you wish to receive it? Ouyang Shuo's heart stirred. The benefits of having a high level of authority had finally arrived. Due to the limited space in the fleet, the majority of the players' game cabins were like containers, densely packed together. The players could not log off at all because there was no space for them to move around offline. Receive. Ouyang Shuo did not hesitate at all. There were side effects of the body being frozen for a long period of time. It would be great if he could log off from time to time to adjust. Moreover, the Five Emperors' true scripture had extremely high requirements for the physical body, and it was perfect for offline training. As soon as Ouyang Shua's voice fell, the game cabin in the real world was rapidly sent to a room by the machine. In less than 20 minutes, Ouyang Shuo received a prompt. System prompt. Player's game cabin is in place. Please log off to adjust the specific layout. Ouyang Shuo suppressed his excitement, returned to a quiet room in the palace, closed his eyes, and went offline. In the universe's starry sky, spaceship serial number ZGD-105. As the door of the game cabin opened, Ouyang Shuo gradually opened his eyes. The soft light stimulated his eyes to the point that they were tearing up. He had not felt light for 5 years. Ouyang Shuo was not in a hurry to get up. Even after dispersing his cultivation, his true essence flowed into his limbs and bones, and his physical body became incomparably strong. Ouyang Shuo still felt weak all over. If it wasn't for the constant baptism of true essence, his muscles would have atrophied. After a long time, Ouyang Shuo slowly got up and looked around. The room wasn't big. There was only one bedroom, one living room, one kitchen, and one bathroom. The area was less than 40 square meters. The game cabin was placed in the corner of the living room. In the middle was a set of fabric sofas, and on the opposite wall was a digital television. At the end of the living room was a large transparent glass. Through the glass, one could see the pitch-black universe. Compared to the Xia Palace, this could only be considered a shabby room. However, only by being here and looking at the vast starry sky outside the window could Ouyang Shuo feel a sense of reality and not an illusion. After all, the game world was just a carrier. In the end, he still had to return to reality. In the next 5 years, while Ouyang Shuo continued to lead the Great Xia dynasty to expand their territory in the game world, he would also have to make preparations for the survival of Planet Hope. At this moment, the television switched on automatically, and Gaia appeared on the screen. "Is this our first time meeting?" Ouyang Shuo took the initiative to greet him. Gaia's eyes flashed, and he avoided answering. "You can request for the layout of the room. As long as you pay achievement points, any request will be satisfied." Ouyang Shuo nodded. "Can you transfer my family's game cabin over?" "Sure." Ouyang Shuo had the ownership of the room, so he could naturally share it with his family. When he was looking around the room just now, Ouyang Shuo was already thinking about how to make the best use of this house. The living room could be used as a public place for family activities, but the bedroom was naturally not used for sleeping. If one wanted to sleep, they could directly enter the game cabin. Ouyang Shuo planned to transform the bedroom into a training room. It would be best if it was a gravity room that could temper the body. "No problem. Pay 500 achievement points." Gaia was very straightforward. Ouyang Shuo felt his heartache. Even though he had more than 10 million achievement points, and 500 achievement points were nothing to him, it couldn't withstand such consumption. He estimated that more than half of the achievement points were used on the gravity field. The training room only had basic training equipment. Ouyang Shuo wanted a weapon that he could use. He looked at Gaia and asked, "Can I customize a sword in reality?" Chapter 1148. Through his conversation with Gaia, Ouyang Shuo finally understood how powerful Level A authority was. In less than an hour, Ouyang Shuo had spent 2.5 million achievement points. If he was not worried that his authority would drop to Level B, he would have spent even more achievement points. There are too many good things. I can't stop. Ouyang Shuo first spent 50,000 achievement points to customize 2 swords for himself and his wife, Songjia. According to Gaia, the custom-made swords would perfectly replicate the Scarlet Knight's sword and Pure June sword they wore. Although there were no special effects, based on their sharpness, toughness, and other physical characteristics, they were definitely divine weapons in reality. The materials used to forge them were the rarest alloys. Most importantly, they could cause damage to the monsters on Planet Hope and break through their tough skin. Therefore, it was definitely worth it. Following that, Ouyang Shuo exchanged for 3 bottles of intermediate G medicine. Each bottle was sold for 100,000 achievement points. In the game, A character's attributes had innate attributes such as talent, comprehension, and other attributes. To a certain extent, it determined the difficulty and speed of a player's cultivation. It was a very important attribute. However, this was fictional data after all. True cultivation still depended on talent in reality. In Gaia's understanding, talent was genes. Genes stored all the information of a life's race: blood type, gestation, growth, and death. It deduced important physiological processes such as reproduction, cell division, and protein synthesis. Birth, growth, decline, illness, aging, and death were all related to genes. Everyone's genes were generally similar. It was just that some genes were active while others were dormant. The gene medicine developed by Gaia was to awaken a person's cultivation genes to the greatest extent and break through the genetic chains. Ouyang Shuo, Song Jia, and Binger were all cultivating top-notch cultivation techniques. If they wanted to be ahead of others in reality, they had to consume the gene medicine to maximize their cultivation talent. That was the prerequisite. Therefore, they had to spend this money. This was only the intermediate gene medicine. According to Gaia, the advanced gene medicine had not been successfully developed. However, it did not affect the cumulative use. It was just that the price of the advanced gene medicine would probably be astronomical. The remaining achievement points were used by Ouyang Shuo to materialize NPCs. Before materializing, Ouyang Shuo asked Gaia a question. After materializing, will they still be under your control? In the game, Gaia was a godlike existence to NPCs. If they materialized in reality, they would still be under Gaia's control, so it would be meaningless. This was Gaia's answer. Every advanced artificial intelligence is my child, an independent life form. After materializing, I will automatically disconnect from them, and we will no longer be related. Ouyang Shuo was silent. Perhaps one day, robots would become a race that stood on equal footing with humans. Without any worries, Ouyang Shuo began to draw up a list of names. According to Gaia's quoted price, conjuring a Homo sapiens required 500,000 achievement points, while conjuring a cyborg required 50,000 achievement points. As for conjuring a combat robot, it only required 5,000 achievement points. Homo sapiens had unparalleled talent and were more outstanding than 90% of humans. Cyborgs were good at both literature and martial arts. The combat level of a cyborg's wearing armor would definitely surpass that of combat robots. In short, the differentiated offer reflected the value of the item. Of course, Ouyang Shuo hoped to materialize all the civil and military officials of the Great Xia dynasty as Homo sapiens. However, that was impossible. Even if he used up 10 million achievement points, he could only materialize 20 people. For the first batch of materialization, Ouyang Shuo chose 4 Homo sapiens and 3 cyborgs. He used up the remaining 15 million achievement points. The 4 Homo sapiens were Jiang Shang, Bai Qi, Zhang Liang, and Jia Su, a civil official, a military general, a think tank, and a strategist. They were the meritorious officials of the Great Xia dynasty. They were also the officials that Ouyang Shuo relied on the most and needed to rope in the most. The 3 cyborgs were Su Chu, Shen Buhai, and Eli. They were Ouyang Shuo's trusted subordinates and required high combat power. Hence, it was most suitable for them to materialize as Homo sapiens. As for the combat robots, they were not within Ouyang Shuo's consideration for the time being. Of course, materialization could not be completed immediately, especially for the Homo sapiens. It would take a year to nurture them and half a year for the cyborgs. Hence, Ouyang Shuo decided to materialize a batch of civil and military officials every year. As for who would be selected into the list, it would depend on their performance. After materialization, they would be able to log into the game and be no different from other players. They would not be unable to resurrect after death. This was the only way to solve the problem of NPCs' resurrection. During the shopping period, Song Jia, Bingner, Yuer, and Luoer's gaming cabins were also transported to their rooms. This was the first time Ouyang Shuo saw his children in real life. The fatherly love that came from the source was something that the game world could not compare to. as Gaia wanted to renovate the bedroom. The custom-made swords could only be delivered in a week. Hence, Ouyang Shua did not delay and entered the game world again. After returning to the Xia Palace, Ouyang Shua was not in a hurry to tell Jiang Shang and the rest about the materialization. The most important thing now was how to deal with the upcoming monster horde. Gaia only gave the territory 3 days to prepare. 3 days later, the monster's nest would appear in the wilderness. Hence, he had to make the arrangements as soon as possible. In the Hall of Martial Heroes, Ouyang Shua held an emergency military meeting. In the outer territories of the dynasty, be it Africa's Somaliland province, or the provinces under the jurisdiction of the Protectorate of the southern border and the Protectorate of the northern border, there were border guards stationed there. For the time being, the Grand Council only needed to send orders to the border guards to strengthen the security of the areas under their jurisdiction. Provinces with satellite cities, such as Morocco Province, had a large number of adventurer players stationed there. They could help the army clear out the monsters' nests. The only place that was relatively weak was Liaojin Province. What worried Ouyang Shua even more was the core of the dynasty. The southern Sichuan province was garrisoned by the city guards and the imperial guards, so naturally they had nothing to worry about. The southern Min province was garrisoned by the brave Tiger Army. The southern Xiang province and the Jiangchuan province were garrisoned by the Hidden Leopard Army, and the Shu province was garrisoned by the Flying Bear Army and the Soaring Eagle Army. The most worrisome areas were the Yunnan and Lingnan provinces. These two provinces were not Zhili province, nor were they border provinces. They only had one garrison regiment stationed there, so they could not withstand the monster horde's invasion. After some discussion, they decided to station the Flying Bear Army's 4th and 5th Corps in Yunnan Province, and the Brave Tiger Army's 4th and 5th Corps in Lingnan Province. They were to station the 5th Corps in Cheongzhou County and Izhou County to help the local garrison regiment. The Imperial Guards would act as the main reserve force and defend the capital. Once the monsters' nests respawned, they would be mobilized according to the actual situation and be ready to provide support to the provinces at any time. Once Ouyang Shua finished arranging the defense of the army, he turned his attention to the adventurer players. Chapter 1149. Following the destruction of the royal city, the players of the Huaxia region were bound to swarm into the 3 dynasties. This was a valuable resource, and Ouyang Shua couldn't fall behind the Great Zhou dynasty. Janya Snow Rose Mercenary Group and Xianyang's Baleful Blood Mercenary Group had already decided to move their headquarters to Shanghai City. More than 90% of their members had migrated to Great Xia. As for Janya and Xianyang, only one branch remained. Shanghai City was as prosperous as any of the royal cities. Not only was it the most prosperous place in the Huaxia region, but it was also the center of global trade. Even Xuanzhou's Flowing Light Pavilion had moved their headquarters to Shanghai City. Capital's unstoppable sword aura, Xiangyang's 18 steeds of Swallow and Cloud, and Chang's embroidered uniform guards had all moved to Handan City and settled in the Great Zhou dynasty. Chengdu's Laojun Temple had already slipped away when Great Xia besieged Chengdu County. The most special was Luoyang's Tingyu Pavilion. They didn't choose to move to the Great Xia dynasty or the Great Zhou dynasty. Instead, they were determined to settle in the Great Han dynasty. From the looks of it, the influence of the Great Zhou dynasty was still the same among the super guilds. However, apart from the super guilds, the large and medium-sized guilds, as well as the small guilds, including the casual players, all chose the Great Xia dynasty and teleported to Shanghai City. Then, they passed through Shanghai City and flowed into the local counties. In just 2 days, the number of adventurer players in Great Xia had reached 20 million, and they were still being teleported over. Great Xia had earned millions of gold coins just from the teleportation fees. It was foreseeable that in less than a week, more than 70% of the players in the Huaxia region would settle in Great Xia, achieving the goal that Ouyang Shua had set. Great Xia and the Huaxia region were almost equal. Although the influx of adventurer players posed a challenge to the security of the counties, It could also greatly stimulate the local consumption and promote the prosperity of local businesses and industrial upgrading. In the process of reducing the number of adventurer players, the counties of Great Xia had already established a relatively complete system of bailiffs. Although there would be a certain impact on the government, Ouyang Shuo believed that it could be digested. In the blink of an eye, it was the 4th of January. At 8 o'clock in the morning, without any notification or system announcement, a huge black fog suddenly appeared in the global wilderness. It surged up and down, and an ear-piercing howl came from the black fog. Some of the black mist appeared in farmlands, some not far from cities, some near villages, some on official roads, and some deep in forests. When the black mist dissipated, grotesquely shaped caves appeared out of thin air. They were deep and terrifying. Then, ugly monsters that were more than 2 meters long, had thick limbs, and had dark skin, dark green skin, and gray skin surged out of the cave in groups. The rows of sharp fangs were enough to make people shiver in fear. Roar! Occasionally, there would be 1 or 2 super monsters that were 4 to 5 meters tall among the monsters. They looked like prehistoric Tyrannosaurus rex, and the moment they appeared, they released a fierce presence. What was even more surprising was that there were even flying monsters in the sky. Their wings were 6 to 7 meters long, just like the winged dragons. They were the true overlords of the sky. The beast tide that gushed out of the cave was bound to set off a monstrous massacre. Wherever it passed, both humans and animals died. The test given by Gaia was clearly much harsher than the players had imagined. Lianzhou Basin, Shanghai City. A giant monster nest had appeared in the grasslands to the north of Shanghai City. When the black mist rose into the air, everyone in the city could see it clearly. The roars of the monsters could be heard from afar, causing people's hearts to go numb. There was an unavoidable commotion in the city, but quickly calmed down. When Ouyang Shuo received the news, he decided to personally lead his troops to investigate. The monster tide was one of their biggest enemies on Planet Hope. How could Ouyang Shuo be at ease without getting a closer look? Zhao Sihu led the first legion of the city guards to the front lines. Ouyang Shuo didn't delay any longer. After handing over the command of troops to the Grand Council, he hurried out of the city with the 3,000 Shenwu guards and headed for the monster nest. Accompanying him were Bloody Romance, Xie and the other guild leaders. Although they had fought against monsters in the underworld before, the monsters that spawned this time were clearly different. Half an hour later, the group arrived at their destination. The city guards had already engaged the monster horde. When Zhao Sihu learned that His Majesty was coming, he hurried over to report. "Your Majesty," Ouyang Shuo nodded, dismounted, and asked, "What's the situation?" "There are about 1,000 monsters surging out of this place. There are 2 large Tyrannosaurus, 12 pterosaurs, and the rest are basically stegosaurs and small draconians." When Gaia released the monster tide attack, there was a simple introduction to the different types of monsters. As a king-class historical genius, Zhao Sihu had a communications compass, so he naturally knew about it. The monsters on Planet Hope were very similar to dinosaurs. To be precise, they were more like a group of dinosaurs that had undergone a second evolution. While shrinking their bodies, they had stronger muscles, tougher skin, sharper claws, and fangs, stronger explosive power, and a terrifying reproduction speed. The last point was the most fatal. The entire Planet Hope seemed to be their world. Because of this, Gaia named these monsters after dinosaurs. As for whether they were like the Western legends, where they could spit fire, the advanced fleet had not yet gathered any relevant information. Naturally, Gaia had no way of determining. Even so, it was already very terrifying. According to Zhao Sihu's description, ordinary swords and sabers would find it difficult to deal fatal damage to the monsters without the infusion of inner force. It was already very fortunate to be able to break through their skin. As for bows and arrows, they were even more ineffective. Only sharp weapons like the 3 bows, 8 bull's bed crossbow could pose a threat to the monsters. Even the divine crossbow appeared powerless. What was even more troublesome was that the mounts could not stand steadily in front of the monster horde. Even the cyan beetle horse could not do it. This also meant that the cavalry could only abandon their horses and fight, crippling half of their martial arts. Against the monster horde, they clearly could not use conventional tactics. In just a short period of time, the 1st City Guard Legion had already lost more than 600 people. When Ouyang Shua heard that, his expression turned solemn. Let's go to the front lines to take a look. Ouyang Shua no longer hesitated as he led the divine martial guards to the battle zone. When Zhao Sihu saw this, he immediately chased after him. At the same time, he secretly dispatched troops to protect the king's safety. After walking for less than a kilometer, a pterosaur flew towards them. The beast spread its 6-meter-long wings and flew close to the ground at a low altitude. With a whoosh, it leaped into the midst of the city guards. When it flew up again, a city guard soldier was already hanging from its hind claws. The pterosaur flew high and released its claws. The soldier fell from the sky, obviously dead. Chapter 1150. After killing a soldier, the pterosaur swooped down again and arrived above Ouyang Shua. Protect the king. The divine martial guards were ready. Su Chu stood with his sword in hand. Ouyang Shua's expression didn't change. He unsheathed the Crimson Knight sword and focused. Although he had lost his ethereal force, his physical strength was still extremely strong. His senses were as sharp as ever. The moment the pterosaur extended its claws, Ouyang Shua dodged to the side. The Crimson Knight sword drew a red arc in the air and ruthlessly slashed at the claws. With a flash of blood, the pterosaur's claws were severed. The pterosaur wailed. The power of a divine weapon was not easy to deal with. Su Chu also performed a meritorious deed. He waved his long sword, and the blade glowed with white light. It was the image of condensed, ethereal force. He slashed at the pterosaur's left wing with lightning speed. Roar! The pterosaur couldn't take it anymore and fell to the ground. It staggered a few steps and was killed by the divine martial guards. Seeing this, the morale of the army was greatly boosted. They didn't expect that they would poke the hornet's nest. When they heard the pterosaur's last wail, the 11 pterosaurs circling in the air all flew over. Even the 2 giant tyrannosauruses glanced in their direction. Ouyang Shua's eyes narrowed. He didn't expect this monster to be so intelligent. His evaluation of it increased a little. Zhao Sihu was about to mobilize the troops to gather here, but Ouyang Shua stopped him. Go and command the troops to kill the other beasts. Leave this place to the divine martial guards. Yes, sir. Zhao Sihu didn't dare to disobey the military order. This was the first time they fought against a beast wave, so the city guards were clearly not used to it. Fortunately, they were all seasoned veterans. Otherwise, their morale would have collapsed. These monsters are not simple. At this moment, Bloody Romance and the others also arrived. They scattered around, ready to fight the pterosaurs. As the best of the combat players, they were more experienced in fighting monsters than the divine martial guards. As they spoke, the pterosaur swooped down. Looking at its speed, it was clearly faster than the previous pterosaur. In the blink of an eye, it was about to attack. This was especially true for the pterosaur in the lead. When it spread its wings, it had a wingspan of 8 meters. Its hind legs were incomparably strong, and its sharp claws were retracted upwards, ready to attack at any time. Before the winged dragon even got close, Ouyang Shua felt a gust of violent wind in his surroundings. Sand and stones were flying and dust was billowing, and it affected Ouyang Shua's vision. What a cunning beast! Ouyang Shua didn't dare dally. He held his breath in concentration and firmly locked onto the pterosaur's sharp claws. Right at this moment, the pterosaur's sharp claws struck out like lightning. They were like 2 iron pincers that wanted to clamp down on Ouyang Shua. Ouyang Shua was greatly shocked. He had misjudged the speed of the opponent's attack. It was already too late for him to move sideways. In a moment of desperation, Ouyang Shua simply fell to the ground, narrowly dodging the attack. The pterosaur's attack missed, so it slightly flapped its wings and actually hovered in the air. Its sharp claws struck out once more, aiming straight for Ouyang Shua's chest. If he was caught, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. How could Ouyang Shua resign himself to death? His left hand supported on the ground, while his right hand circulated the crimsonite sword to meet the attack. The pterosaur had seen the might of the crimsonite sword before, so it didn't dare to meet it head-on and revealed a trace of hesitation. Seeing this, Ouyang Shua took advantage of the situation to straighten his upper body, and the crimsonite sword pierced forward. Subsequently, it drew an arc in the air and circled around the pterosaur's claws. Fresh blood splattered everywhere. The sharp claws, skin, tendons, and bones were all severed, and was already crippled. Oh, the pterosaur was injured, and its blood was actually aroused. It forcefully endured the intense pain and swooped down recklessly, and its uninjured sharp claws clawed towards Ouyang Shua's head. Ouyang Shua sneered as he exerted force with his left hand and spun on the spot. He'd already circled around the pterosaur, and the crimsonite sword pierced out once more, aiming straight for the pterosaur's throat. Ouyang Shua had already exerted his full strength in this move. The crimsonite sword transformed into a red light, and half of the sword's blade pierced into the pterosaur's throat. Blood splattered everywhere. Ouyang Shua pulled out his sword and swiftly dodged to the side, but he was still splashed with blood. The pterosaur chieftain fell to the ground dead. Its rugby ball-shaped head smashed into the ground, revealing a row of fangs. While Ouyang Shua was dealing with the battle, bloody romance, and the others also managed to kill the pterosaur. From the looks of it, in front of true experts, the pterosaurs were still somewhat lacking. However, for the soldiers, this was already a huge test. Even the valiant divine martial guards had instantly lost 3 men to the pterosaur's ambush. Ouyang Shua was a little worried about the defense of the other monster nests. Next, Ouyang Shua led the divine martial guards and smoothly killed 2 more pterosaurs, helping the city guards take control of the situation. Even so, the battle only ended in the afternoon. Compared to the pterosaur's huge body was actually a weakness in front of experts. As long as they avoided the pterosaur's biting and stomping, and had a bit of patience, they could chop off the pterosaur's pillar-like limbs one by one. However, for the ordinary soldiers, the pterosaur was a true killing machine. When it charged into the army formation, practically no one could stop it. With a single stomp, it could turn a person into meat paste. In order to surround and kill the beast horde, the first corps of the city guards lost more than 1,800 soldiers. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Ouyang Shua hurried back to Shanghai City with a slightly heavy heart. Ouyang Shua could be considered to have experienced the power of the beast horde. The entire territory of Great Xia would face such a cruel test. Because the territory was too vast, it was inevitable that the common people would suffer from the disaster. Xia Palace, Grand Council. How is it? Have the statistics of the various places been calculated? Ouyang Shua asked. Military Affairs Minister Du Ruhue nodded, handed over a letter, and briefly said, according to the statistics, a total of 82 monster nests have appeared in the dynasty. On average, there's 1 in each county. Of course, we can't rule out the possibility that some of the monster nests have appeared in the deep mountains and dense forests, but for the time being, we haven't found any traces of them. There are big and small monster nests. The biggest nest has more than 2,000 monsters, and the smallest nest has less than 100 monsters. The distribution of the nests is also extremely uneven. Some counties have none, some counties have 3 nests. Ouyang Shua asked, how is the disaster situation? The cabinet is still calculating the detailed situation. Currently, the most severely affected is Lingnan Province. There have been 8 monster nests in this province. The largest one is here. The 4th and 5th Corps of the Brave Tiger Army received the transfer order. Although they traveled day and night, only the vanguard troops reached Lingnan Province. Because of this, the Grand Council has already urgently transferred the 1st Corps of the Imperial Guards to Lingnan Province to suppress the situation, But the nests are located far away from Jinhai City, and there is already a county town that has been breached by the beast horde. Ouyang Shua's face darkened. He did not need to think to know what kind of fate the local people would face after the county town was breached by the beast horde. These beasts were simply killing machines, all of them bloodthirsty. They did not kill people purely to fill their stomachs. Seeing this, Du Ruhui continued to report. The situation in Liaojin province is not too good. The Northern Frontier Army is already somewhat unable to suppress the situation. The Second Corps of the Imperial Guards has already rushed over to reinforce. Chapter 11:51. The ferocious beast tide seemed to have returned the wilderness to the scene of the first year of Gaia. At that time, wild beasts ran amok in the wilderness. Bandits and roving bandits could be seen everywhere, and refugees were running around. It was like hell on earth. It was the emergence of countless lords who led the people to overcome the obstacles, build their homes, and return peace to the wilderness. 5 years had passed, and the painful memories had gradually faded. The newborn children had even forgotten about the war and were immersed in peace and prosperity. Gaia sounded the alarm bell. The ferocious beast tide wreaked havoc in the wilderness. Countless villages were trampled into ruins, cities fell, and the people were homeless. Wailing filled the wilderness as if the end of the world had come again. Neither the cold nor the heat could stop the beast tide from attacking. In Liaojin province, groups of monsters braved the wind and cold as they killed the sheep that entered the pens and the herdsmen's gathering place. In Morocco province, the monsters did not fear the heat and were extraordinarily fierce. In Ijo province, there were monsters that attacked from the sea. In Shu province, there were monsters that crossed the mountains and precipitous ridges. It seemed that the monsters could easily adapt to every kind of terrain and every kind of climate, which made people feel despair. In a single night, the wilderness had changed color. It's just that this is not the first year of Gaia. After 5 years of overcoming brambles and thorns, the wilderness had become fertile soil, and the soil had become a city. The territory now had a well-trained army, as well as countless powerful combat players. They would stand at the forefront of the battle. Xiao Palace, Grand Council. After listening to the report, Ouyang Shua said, "Pass down the order. Before the beginning of next spring, put aside all military plans and deal with the beast tide attack with all our strength. We must establish fixed camps near every nest." Yes, Du Ruhui nodded. With the attack of the beast tide, the dynasty was bound to experience turmoil and face a severe test. The following week was full of ups and downs. In addition to the first wave of the beast tide, monsters would pour out of the monster nest from time to time, either in a dozen sporadically or in groups, constantly attacking the defense line in the wilderness. The army attacked everywhere, following the traces of the beast tide and killing them all the way. Casualty reports from counties and counties converged on the imperial court like snowflakes, making the cabinet dizzy and disoriented. In just 1 week, the Great Xia army had lost more than 30,000 people and more than 200,000 civilians. The direct property losses were no less than 10 million gold coins, and the indirect losses were immeasurable. Such a huge loss was no less than a large-scale war. What made Ouyang Shua feel slightly relieved was that a week had passed, and all the armies had taken their positions. They had set up camps near the monster nest to prevent the situation from getting worse. In the following period of time, the army had to clear out the remaining monsters scattered in the wilderness, while sending a large number of soldiers to be stationed in various camps, ready to intercept the monster hordes at any time. While the cabinet provided disaster relief, they also actively cooperated with the Combat Readiness Division to ensure the logistical support of more than 80 camps to ensure the supply of rations and supplies. In the process, the role of the combat players was not very eye-catching. The reason was that with the resurrection restrictions and the real-time update of achievement points, players had become more concerned about their lives. Every reincarnation meant a sharp decrease in achievement points. Ouyang Shua couldn't say anything about this. His intuition told him that avoiding battle was not a solution. If they did not experience the tempering of blood and fire in the game world, they would have to pay the price in blood on the future Hope Planet. It was up to the players to decide which was more important. It could even be said that Ouyang Shuo had vaguely grasped Gaia's true intentions. Not everyone was suitable to be a warrior. When players first chose a combat profession, it was only because of their understanding of the game world. They never thought that one day, combat would be linked to reality and be closely related. When the illusory veil was lifted and they were faced with a bloody battlefield, there would naturally be people who would shrink back. Similarly, in this process, Gaia would be able to filter out the true warriors. The players who could fight to the end would be the main force of Hope Planet in the future. Survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest. The monster horde had not only changed the mode of territorial warfare, but it had also changed the adventuring players. Gaia Year 6, 10th of January, Summer Palace. In the hall of Wenhua, Ouyang Shuo was holding a cabinet meeting. It was almost the end of the year. In this cabinet meeting, other than reviewing and approving the disaster relief and reconstruction plans submitted by the Governor General's office and the two protectorates, there were also a few major issues. First, finalizing the evaluation plan for the officials. The annual evaluation of the officials was of utmost importance to the imperial court. Since the officials came from different dynasties and had different governance methods, Ouyang Shuo requested the Office of Personnel Management to formulate a numerical evaluation index, including political, economic, cultural, and other indicators. They would be evaluated and the fittest would be eliminated. They would officially establish a tenure system for the officials. There would be a minor examination every year and a major examination every 3 years, making a 3-year tenure. There are hundreds of thousands of officials in Great Xia, so the Office of Personnel Management was naturally too busy. They mainly targeted the officials in the capital, as well as the Governor General and county governors. The rest of the officials would be evaluated by the Governor General's office and reported to the Office of Personnel Management. What was different from previous years was that the Imperial Censorate would be involved in the entire evaluation. Second, reviewing the sacrificial ceremony plan. Ouyang Shuo had been promoted to the title of Emperor. The sacrificial ceremony in the coming year would not be the ceremony of feudal vassals or nobles, but the highest level of Emperor's ceremony. Naturally, it would be extraordinary. The corresponding regal attire, etiquette, and procedures would have to be redone. The construction office was already rebuilding the ancestral temple, and the statues would be enshrined on the basis of Emperor Yin and Emperor Huang, perfecting them into the 3 sovereigns and 5 emperors to show the legitimacy of Huaxia. As for whether to invite other emperors to attend the ceremony, the cabinet was still discussing. Third, reviewing the laws. The draft of the Civil Code, Commercial Code, and Criminal Code had already been completed under the auspices of the Internal Affairs Council. After the cabinet's deliberation, it would be amended and perfected for the final time. From next year onwards, it would be officially promulgated and implemented. Fourth, reviewing the thought of Emperor Yin. In order to unify the dynasty's ideological system, under the leadership of Jiangshang, Confucius, and the others, the compilation of the thought of Emperor Yin had been in full swing, forming the first draft. During this period, the 100 schools of thought argued incessantly. If it wasn't for Jiangshang's mediation, the draft wouldn't have been completed until now. Even so, the contents of the draft were still controversial. Ouyang Shuo's previous ideas were a little too simple. Unifying the ideology was more difficult than fighting for hegemony, and it wasn't something that could be done in half a year. Fortunately, in the process of the debate, the 100 schools of thought once again collided with each other, creating many dazzling sparks that attracted more 100 schools of thought to participate. Without a doubt, this was another spectacle in the history of Huaxia's ideology. Fifth, establishing etiquette. The changes during this period of time had made Ouyang Shuo unconsciously connect the game world and Hope Planet more closely. Breaking through the barrier between the two worlds was Ouyang Shuo's ambition. The breakthrough point was on etiquette, which was the foundation of Huaxia, but which had been lost too quickly. It was necessary to formulate a set of etiquette that was in line with Huaxia's tradition and suitable for Hope Planet. Chapter 1152. Making rights was a matter that needed to be very careful. If it was not done well, the foundation might be shaken. The cabinet meeting only put forward an idea. The specifics had to wait until the Yinhuang thought was finalized before organizing the demonstration. After the cabinet meeting ended, Ouyang Shuo returned to the everlasting palace. Bing and Song Jia had been waiting for a long time, preparing to log off with Ouyang Shuo today. Yesterday, Ouyang Shuo had received a notification from Gaia that the room had been remodeled according to the requirements. In the universe, spaceship ZGD-105. In the small but warmly decorated living room, Ouyang Shuo and his family were enjoying dinner around the coffee table. There weren't many dishes, only scrambled eggs with tomatoes, cabbage, and stir-fried meat with chili. Compared to the sumptuous delicacies in the game, it was extremely simple, but for the fleet, it was already a luxury. Although the space fleet had built indoor markets and farms, the output was limited, and most of the materials had to be used for the production of nutrients, so they could only supply them in limited quantities. Every dish that Ouyang Shuo ordered would cost him achievement points. Although the dishes were simple, everyone ate with relish. Song Jia picked up a piece of tomato and said with a smile, "It's been 5 years in the blink of an eye. I've almost forgotten what tomatoes taste like." Tomatoes originated from South America and had yet to be introduced to Great Xia. Ouyang Shuo glanced at Bing and gave her a cabbage. Although Bing body was still the same as when she was 7 years old, she was no longer as jumpy as before. Her thinking had already matured. This scene caused Ouyang Shuo to feel as if time and space were in disorder. There was a price to be paid for traveling back and forth between two completely different worlds. When people got used to everything that was out of place, the way of thinking of the entire population would undergo a fundamental change. By then, the game world would no longer be just a virtual world. Because of this, Ouyang Shuo did not wake up Yuer and Luo. To the two of them, before they reached Hope Planet, it was better for them to stay in the game world. They were still not used to this kind of space-time transition. Moreover, a small room was not a child's playground. After dinner, Song Jia chatted with Bing in the living room, admiring the vast universe outside the window. Ouyang Shuo, on the other hand, walked into the newly renovated training room, preparing to cultivate the 5 Emperors mantra for the first time. Back when he cultivated in-game, he was in existence similar to a spirit body. With Gaia's guidance, his understanding of cultivation techniques, and even cultivation was actually very superficial. It was like a force-feeding education. Therefore, Ouyang Shuo was prepared to start his cultivation journey in the real world and truly build a solid foundation. Things did not go well. Although Ouyang Shuo had countless cultivation experiences, he still encountered difficulties when he sat down cross-legged and held his breath in concentration. The feedback from his physical body made him unable to enter a meditative state. People have 1,000 things to think about. The first step in cultivation was to get rid of evil desires and understand one's true nature. This was called dispersing distractions and revealing one's true self. When we hold our breath in concentration, it is not that the mind is blank, but that all kinds of thoughts appear uncontrollably. At this moment, the best way was to concentrate and visualize an object or a technique. The true scriptures of the 5 emperors visualized the 5 emperors themselves, namely the Eastern Green Emperor, the Southern Red Emperor, the Central Yellow Emperor, the Western White Emperor, and the Northern Black Emperor. Ouyang Shuo was visualizing the Eastern Wood Emperor. The image of the Azure of the Arch had already been engraved in Ouyang Shuo's mind. Now that he focused, the image of the Azure of the Arch slowly appeared, becoming more and more realistic and lifelike. During this process, one would naturally see one's true nature and get rid of all distracting thoughts. At this stage, Ouyang Shuo still could not slack off because this was just the beginning. He focused his thoughts on his lower dantian and breathed rhythmically according to the rhythm of the true scriptures of the 5 emperors. He inhaled genuine qi and exhaled turbid qi. Gradually, there was an itchy feeling in his dantian, as if a little mouse was scurrying around. Then, there was a warm feeling. In his dantian, a small mass of qi condensed out of thin air. This was the first genuine qi. That's right, the cultivation of the true scriptures of the five emperors directly skipped over inner force and started with genuine qi. Later on, it would be converted into genuine essence, which was naturally much easier than converting inner force. After successfully condensing the first qi mass, the rest was easy. Ouyang Shua only needed to concentrate and control the qi mass to circulate according to the specific meridians of the true scriptures of the five emperors. Then the qi mass would gradually grow bigger. Ouyang Shua's meridians had already been widened once, so the first major circulation was very smooth. Ouyang Shua circulated it for an entire 7 great circulations before he stopped and completed the first round of cultivation, whereas an entire 3 hours had already passed. If not for Ouyang Shua's good physical fitness, his legs would have gone numb. When he returned to the living room, Song Jia and Binger had already logged back into the game. Ouyang Shua went to the window and looked at the vast starry sky outside. For a moment, he was a little lost in thought. Ouyang Shua was very happy with the changes that had happened in the past 10 days. Especially at the moment when the Federation disintegrated, he felt that the cage that had been binding him was suddenly disintegrated. He felt extremely free and at ease. From then on, he could fly freely in the sky and swim freely in the sea. Ouyang Shua took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "I can already smell the scent of a new world." Gaia Year 6, 15th of January. The changes that the beast tide had brought to the global wilderness had gradually stabilized. After freeing up their hands, the 2 mysterious organizations finally took action and declared their existence to the global players. First, the Silver Hand was exposed in a high-profile manner, and its members formed a global alliance. The name of the alliance was called the Silver Hand. Unsurprisingly, more than 90% of the members had joined the Silver Hand. The remaining 10% had joined another global alliance, the Azure Badge. Compared to the Silver Hand, the Azure Badge was more low-key. Its members were less than half of the Silver Hands. Even so, it was still a supergiant. Ouyang Shua could tell at a glance that the so-called Azure Badge was simply the embodiment of academics. When the members of the 2 alliances were exposed one by one, the global players were shocked to find that more than 90% of the territories in the world had joined the 2 organizations. More than half of the guilds were also members of the 2 organizations. Such a shocking fact made the ordinary players feel a chill in their hearts. So, at a level that they can't reach, there have always been 2 shadows shrouding the sky. Although the Federation had disintegrated, the oligarchs still existed. They were even more rampant and shocking. Faced with this cruel reality, every player was faced with a new choice. They could join the oligarchs' camp and seek protection. Whether it was the Silver Hand or the Azure Badge, the moment they were exposed, they extended an olive branch to the ordinary players. Obviously, they were also changing. Of course, the players had other choices. They could fight alone, or they could choose to fight in between the oligarchs and forcefully carve out a bloody path. For example, the Great Xia Dynasty. Chapter 1153. After the Silver Hand and Azure Badge were exposed, Great Xia's situation suddenly became difficult. In the face of a crisis, the members of the 2 organizations instinctively chose to group together and no longer bet on either side. Just like Henry and William, they could no longer have any goodwill towards Great Xia. Even if they wanted to, the families behind them would not agree. Before Gaia revealed its cards, both the Silver Hand and Azure Badge believed that they had a trump card and could dominate the construction of Planet Hope, so they were fearless. Now, they had no way out, so they had to use all resources to attack cities in the game world, earn as many achievement points as possible, and then regain dominance. They would go all out against Great Xia. The most direct impact was that the Trans-Mediterranean Trade Partnership Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership Agreement would exist in name only, and the members of the two organizations would withdraw. Ouyang Shuo simply disbanded the two major trade organizations. Piao and Johor, which had previously intended to submit to Great Xia, were actually members of Azerbaijan. Naturally, there was no way to talk about submitting, which added some variables to the situation in Southeast Asia. Great Xia's efforts to reverse the decline in trade were once again pushed down. Recently, it was inevitable that there would be a setback in the ocean trade. Be it the Silver Hand or Azerbaijan, they would not cooperate with Great Xia. The global trade pattern was about to usher in three polarization: the Silver Hand's P, the Azerbaijan's newly established TUP, and the Great Xia dynasty and the Indian Empire. The only blank area was the African continent. In front of Great Xia, there would be a difficult road filled with thorns. If Ouyang Shuo was not very ambitious, there would be no need to worry too much. At most, as long as Great Xia took the initiative to shrink its defensive line and give up its overseas occupation, there would not be too much conflict with the Silver Hand or Azerbaijan. In the Huaxia region, or even in the entire Asian battlefield, if Great Xia chose a defensive strategy, no one could overthrow Great Xia. At most, it would be blockades and restrictions. After all, this was no longer the past. Unfortunately, Ouyang Shuo's ambition was far more than that. Gaia using Skynet to take over the Federation was also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Ouyang Shuo, an opportunity to overthrow the Silver Hand in one fell swoop and establish a new order on Planet Hope. In troubled times, who is a hero? The times create heroes, and heroes can also create the times. In the first 5 years, it was the times that brought about Ouyang Shuo's rise. In the last 5 years, it was the time when Ouyang Shuo changed the world. This is very difficult, but Ouyang Shuo was fearless. He had already come this far, so why not go even higher? The confrontation in the game world would only be more intense and cruel. Of course, to ordinary players, they would not feel the danger, because no matter how hard they worked, they were no longer able to influence the global situation. They didn't even have the qualifications to be chess pieces. Ordinary players could only decide their own fate. Would they choose to be a brave warrior, or would they follow the weakness in their hearts and return to being ordinary? As the mysterious veil of Planet Hope was slowly lifted, the casual players, who were basically just waiting to die, aside from the casual players, were also limited in their usefulness. Reality was not a game. In the face of such a dangerous and barbaric world, only strength was the greatest guarantee. The game world was about to usher in a period of fog. It was unknown who would be the real winner and who would be the loser when the fog dispersed. Shanghai City, Palace of Summer. In the Palace of Wenhua, Ouyang Shuo met with Xie Xiun, Crimson Romance. Bright Moon illuminates the river, and more than 40 other guild leaders who were stationed in Great Xia. Accompanying them was the military minister, Du Ruhui. These were only the large and above guilds. The leaders of the small and medium-sized guilds were not invited. In order to thank the guilds for moving their headquarters to Shanghai City, Ouyang Shuo waved his pen and drew out an entire street in the city to serve as the guild's base. Every guild was allocated a house to serve as their headquarters. According to the housing prices in Shanghai City, a house alone would be worth tens of thousands of gold coins. Of course, for guilds that easily had more than 100,000 members, a house was just a drop in the bucket. Most of the members had to be scattered throughout the city or down to the counties. Shanghai City suddenly became crowded. Ouyang Shuo had already instructed the construction department to prepare to build 2 satellite cities in the west and east of the city at the same time to accommodate the Great Xia players. Some of the original residents would also move out of Shanghai City. This would relieve the population pressure in Shanghai City. Every inch of land in Shanghai City was worth its weight in gold. It was truly the #1 city in the world. The meeting at the Palace of Wenhua was to play host, but more importantly, it was to discuss with the guilds about the defense of the monster nests in Great Xia Dynasty. This was to prevent unnecessary misunderstandings. Right now, they were discussing the issue of the encampment. The Imperial Court has already set up temporary encampments near each of the monster nests. In the next 2 months, the temporary encampments will be built into semi-permanent encampments. There is no need to doubt Great Xia's great mobilization ability. What I mean is that you don't need to build new encampments. Just draw out an area in the military camp for the players to rest and resupply. The Imperial Court will not collect any land fees, but they will also welcome merchants to move in, Ouyang Shua said. Strictly speaking, the territory in Great Xia belonged to the Imperial Court. Even if the guilds wanted to build their encampments, they would have to pay a land rental fee to the local government office. In order to facilitate management, Ouyang Shua decided to merge the 2 encampments into one. I think that's fine. Crimson Romance expressed her support. For the guilds, just renting land wasn't enough to build an encampment. They would also have to hire craftsmen, purchase construction materials, and so on. They had just moved in and were unfamiliar with the place. More importantly, there were more than 10 monster nests. They couldn't possibly build an encampment in every location, right? Not only was it a waste, but it was also unrealistic. If the encampments were built by Great Xia, then there wouldn't be any problems. No matter which monster nest the players went to, they would be able to find a place to rest. It was very convenient. If they were to camp together with the Great Xia army, their safety would also be guaranteed. Of course, what really moved Crimson Romance and the others was the last sentence that Ouyang Shua said. There were real benefits involved. The appearance of monster nests was both a crisis and a business opportunity. Adventuring players needed to accumulate combat experience, hunt for materials, and refine their martial arts skills through battles with monsters. Naturally, this would create a consumer market. In the encampment, food, clothing, accommodation, equipment repair, potions, and medical treatment were all things that cost money. Because the encampments were semi-permanent, this was a huge market. From Ouyang Shua's words, it was clear that he didn't intend to rely on his large shop to bully the customers and monopolize the market. Chapter 1154. The Imperial Court will not interfere with the areas that the guilds are good at, such as medicine, equipment, inns, etc. They will only provide services to the players in basic industries such as food and iron, or which the guilds are not willing to enter or are not good at. Ouyang Shua's stand had completely warmed the hearts of everyone present here. Compared to the immediate benefits, Ouyang Shua placed more importance on the players' recognition of Great Xia. He wanted the players to have a sense of belonging. After all, those who participated in the siege of the monster nests were all elite combat players. Furthermore, although the Imperial Court would not fight with the guilds, the rental of shops and business taxes could generate stable income. It could cover the expenses of building the camp and even generate profits. Since that was the case, why would Ouyang Shua be calculative? After settling the matter of the camp, the next step was to discuss the specific issues of defense. Ouyang Shua hoped to give each guild a rough battle zone, with the province as the boundary. He wanted to make sure that each province had a stable fighting force. No problem. Because of the sweet offer he had given, the guild leader naturally knew how to return the favor. After settling a few important matters, Ouyang Shua ended the meeting. The specific matters of defense would naturally be discussed by the Privy Council and the guilds. It was not something that could be discussed in a short period of time. Gaia Year 6, 17th of January, Shanghai City. There was less than a month left to the Spring Festival. Ouyang Shua once again started to receive the officials intensively. He wanted to make arrangements for the Spring Festival before the government closed for the holidays. In the Imperial Study, Ouyang Shua summoned the head of the Department of Agriculture, Jia Sixi. Food was the most important thing to the people. The status of agriculture in the dynasty was naturally unquestionable. Great Xia's agricultural technology was the most advanced in the world. It was just that after the founding of the dynasty, Ouyang Shua had never paid attention to it. Now that he summoned Jia Sixi, there was naturally a change in the situation. In the fourth system update, Gaia had activated natural disaster mode. Even though Great Xia was protected by the gods and had good weather, its food production was still unavoidably affected. In addition, in the past year, a large number of refugees had spawned, causing the population to increase rapidly. There were a few large-scale wars within the year, and the consumption of food was also very shocking. Even with Great Xia's food production, it was still somewhat lacking. As tens of millions of players migrated to Great Xia, it ushered in a very sudden surge in population. The crisis of food shortage was gradually revealed. The attack of the beast tide was the last straw that crushed the granary of Great Xia. Not to mention that a large number of farmlands had been destroyed. In order to provide disaster relief, the imperial court had to open the granaries to help the victims. The amount of food consumed every day was calculated in millions. If it weren't for the fact that Great Xia's grain reserve strategy was in place, they might not have been able to hold on. Jia Sixi was undoubtedly extremely sharp. He'd already caught on to the food crisis when it had just appeared and swiftly reported it to the higher-ups, thus drawing the attention of Ouyang Shua. The other territories didn't have to worry about the sudden increase in population, so they weren't aware of the approaching crisis. Jia Sixi said, in the last half a month, the Department of Agriculture has sent officials to all the provinces to check on the state of the local granaries. On the whole, it's good, but there are some granaries that don't have enough food for disaster relief as required. Ouyang Shua's face darkened. Storing food for disaster relief is the basic duty of local officials. Someone actually dares to be perfunctory in this aspect. Their intentions are deserving of death. Jia Sixi did not dare to refute. He knew that the king was angry. The Department of Agriculture has passed on the findings of the investigation to the Department of Internal Affairs to handle. Although Ouyang Shua had brushed it off lightly, with the intervention of the Internal Affairs Council, it was likely to set off a huge storm in the court. Yes, Your Majesty. Can the food reserves last until the next harvest? Ouyang Shua asked. Jia Sixi did not dare to carelessly boast. He hesitantly said, according to the current situation, there will definitely be some food shortages. I'm more worried that the merchants will smell the business opportunity and take the opportunity to hoard food. The farmers will also subconsciously be unwilling to sell their food reserves, which will further exacerbate the food shortage. Ouyang Shua nodded. Jia Sixi's worries weren't without reason. Great Xia had always maintained a relatively open and relaxed business environment. As long as the merchants didn't hoard food, the Yamen wouldn't be able to do anything to them. After thinking for a moment, Ouyang Shua said, after you come down, the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Commerce will work together to think of a way to eliminate this hidden danger in advance. There were plenty of opportunities to make money in Great Xia. With the involvement of the Department of Commerce, the number of merchants who would take the risk would be greatly reduced. After all, if the merchants wanted to survive in Great Xia, it wasn't a good thing to offend the imperial court. Understood. Jia Sixi nodded. With the king's personal command, things would be much easier to handle. Otherwise, the Department of Commerce wouldn't take the request of the Department of Agriculture seriously, and that would be a huge problem. In the case of a food shortage, internal control could only treat the symptoms but not the root cause. Ouyang Shua was going to inform the Department of Finance to take advantage of the TUP's establishment and the opportunity to use the convenience of ocean trade to purchase a large amount of food in Southeast Asia. He could even instruct the merchants to purchase food from Java. As long as there was profit to be made, there would naturally be merchants who would take the risk and smuggle food behind the territory. As long as it was done properly, this food crisis might turn into an opportunity. Thinking of this, Ouyang Shua said, "Come in. Here, summon the Minister of Finance. Family, yes." Family hurried over very quickly. Minister Jia, explain the situation to Sir Fan, Ouyang Shua said. Yes. Jia Sixi didn't expect the king to act so swiftly and decisively. He directly summoned the Minister of Finance for a face-to-face discussion. He didn't dare to be negligent and explained the imperial court's food crisis in detail. Fan Li was astute and immediately understood the king's intention. He said, "The king wants to borrow the Department of Commerce to conduct a large-scale purchase of food? Smart." Ouyang Shua smiled and said, "A crisis is an opportunity. We have no way to judge how the beast tide will wreak havoc in the first half of next year, whether it will intensify or slow down. We also have no way to judge whether there will be more natural disasters in the wilderness in the first half of next year. But since we smell an opportunity, we naturally don't mind taking a gamble." "How much funds can the imperial court use for the purchase of food?" Ouyang Shua asked. Fan Li's eyes narrowed. He realized that the king was going to do something big this time. He thought for a moment and replied, "It's almost the end of the year, and the various expenditures have already been accounted for. Excluding the emergency funds reserved for next year, we can use at least 8 to 10 million gold coins." Great Xia was indeed rich and overbearing. The consecutive wars at the end of the year, coupled with the expansion of the army, consumed millions or even tens of millions of gold coins each time. Even so, the imperial court was still able to fork out tens of millions of gold coins. According to the current price of food, the amount of food purchased with 10 million gold coins was enough to support Great Xia's consumption for 5 months. If the amount of food was piled up together, it would probably be equivalent to the volume of Shanghai City. Fan Li's boldness could not be said to be small. Jia Sixi, who was at the side, heard this, and his eyes lit up. This time, Jia Sixi could finally swallow his worries. If the imperial court purchased such a batch of food, the crisis would be resolved, and the merchants would naturally not have the conditions to hoard food. All the crises would no longer exist. Unexpectedly, Ouyang Shua shook his head and said, "It's not enough. Your Majesty, please enlighten us." Fan Li was a little confused. Ouyang Shua said, "If it's just to resolve the crisis, then it's naturally enough. But what if the 2 predicted disasters occur in the first half of next year? What will the situation be like?" Fan Li and Jia Sixi looked at each other and saw the seriousness in each other's eyes. There was already an insufficient amount of food. The reason why no one had realized the impending crisis was because they had a stable expectation of the food production in the first half of next year, so they did not take it seriously. If the expectation failed, the wilderness would definitely be in chaos. It could even be said that if they were not careful, the people would be plunged in a misery and suffering. Fan Li thought for a moment and said, "Forgive me for being blunt, but the 2 disasters are very uncertain. Isn't it a little inappropriate to place our bets here?" A proactive and stable policy was the right way to govern an empire. Fan Li's words were from the bottom of his heart. Ouyang Shua gave a gratified smile. "Your Majesty is loyal to the country. This king is very pleased. I dare not accept your Majesty's praise. It's just that." Ouyang Shua's smile vanished. His gaze seemed to penetrate the void and see the unknown. He said leisurely, "With this king's intuition and judgment, this is definitely not a gamble in the pure sense. If I'm not wrong, there's at least a 50% chance that the worst-case scenario will happen." Ouyang Shua could now figure out Gaia's thoughts. In the past 5 years, Gaia was just testing its limits. It was not really ruthless to the players' tests. As long as they responded appropriately, the Overlord would still be able to handle the wilderness with ease. Gaia's 6th year would definitely be a watershed. The upcoming test would only become more and more cruel. There was no room for maneuver. Be it the Silver Hand, the Azure Emblem, or the Great Xia Dynasty, it was impossible to say that they would be able to play their own little schemes and constantly attack cities and territories. If that was the case, what was the point? What Gaia wanted were powerhouses that could survive in the extremely harsh environment of Planet Hope. They were definitely not oligarchs that relied on their size to constantly bully the weak. Based on this, Ouyang Shua made such a judgment. In Gaia's 6th year, there would definitely be a wave of crisis that would cause great trouble for the territory. When Fan Li heard this, he took a deep breath and nodded. If there's a 50% chance, it's indeed worth the gamble. In the face of such great benefits, family was willing to accompany His Majesty, even if there was a 40 or 30% chance of success, much less a 50% chance. Family did not doubt His Majesty's judgment at all. Most kings had foresight that ordinary people did not have. The development of the Great Xia had already proved that His Majesty was a far-sighted person. After successfully convincing family, Ouyang Shuo smiled. In that case, let's borrow 10 million from the Bank of the Four Seas and conduct a large grain purchase. With the Bank of the Four Seas' current size, there was no risk in borrowing money. Yes, family was a little excited. This was a great deal. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.